que realmente transforma a vida das pessoas? Na Shopee, nós acreditamos no poder transformador da tecnologia. Queremos mudar o mundo para melhor, fornecendo uma plataforma que conecta compradores e vendedores dentro da comunidade. Vinda de Singapura, a Shopee já conta com mais de 7.000 colaboradores espalhados pelo país em pouco mais de 3 anos de operação. Sabia que hoje mais de 85% das vendas na Shopee são de empreendedores brasileiros? E já reunimos uma comunidade de mais de 3 milhões de vendedores nacionais. Isso mesmo, como a história da Brenda e do Felipe.
Os nossos pedidos só foram aumentando, né?
Alugamos uma casa, conseguimos comprar um terreno em um condomínio fechado. Praticamente mudou da água para o vinho.
É a tecnologia que possibilita trilhar o seu próprio caminho, como fez o Vitor.
O que me levou a empreender, na época, foi questão de necessidade, né? Minha mãe, ela teve um problema de saúde. Cheguei no meu chefe e falei pra ele a situação da minha mãe e falei, eu tô precisando de R$200 de aumento. E na época, infelizmente, né, ou felizmente, foi recusado. E eu tenho um amigo dos Correios, né, eu conheci ele há 7 anos. E ele chegou pra mim e falou, Vitor, vem aqui na Shopee, né, o pessoal tá chegando muita etiqueta do Correio lá, pô, cara, tá estourada a plataforma, todo mundo tá querendo conhecer, é aqui que você pode escalar. No primeiro dia eu coloquei um anúncio, no segundo dia já tinha acontecido umas 20 vendas. Eu falei, cara, mas não é possível, como assim 20 vendas em um dia? Mudou, né? Mudou a empresa da água para o vinho.
A tecnologia que leva os produtos que você precisa para qualquer lugar do Brasil.
Muitas das coisas que eu tenho comprado não tem disponível aqui na minha cidade, né? Por ser uma cidade bem pequena. E com a Shopee tudo chega rapidinho.
Juntos podemos fazer mais e melhor para transformar vidas, gerar oportunidades e bons negócios para todos. Shopee, tecnologia que transforma vidas e impulsiona novas histórias.
Shopee!
Bom dia, senhoras e senhores.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We'll now be beginning the 3rd edition of Latin America Cities Conference, Brasília, which is organized by the Council of the American. I'd like to welcome all the executive members of the Council of the America, ambassadors and diplomatic bodies, Brazilian government members, and the press which is here today. Thank you very much also to all of those who are following us live online all over the world, and the site of the Council of the Americas through the platform, YouTube platform in English, on the portal of ASCOA, and on the LinkedIn platform and the American Society Council of the Americans channel of LinkedIn. So we would like to invite all those here present and our spectators to participate of the dialogue on social media and interact with conference speakers and organizers through Twitter and the platform of LinkedIn with the hashtag CouncilBR. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to make a special thanks to the authorities of the Brazilian government which will be participating of this chat during this morning. The Minister of Justice and Public Security, Flavio Dino, Minister of Science, Technology and Innovation, Luciana Santos, President of the Senate, Rodrigo Pacheco, Ambassador, General Secretariat of the External Relations, Maria Laura da Rocha, National Secretary of Energetic Transition and Planning of the Ministry of Mines and Energy, Thiago Barral, and the National Secretary of Environment and Environmental Quality, Adalberto Maluf. We would also like to thank the Ambassador of the United States in Brazil, Mrs. Elizabeth Bagley. Ladies and gentlemen, we would like to give our deep thanks to all the panelists and to the sponsors of this conference, which is so important to us and so dear. Sponsors, we have Amazon Web Services. Corporate sponsors, Kellogg's Brazil, Chevron Corporation, SIA Group, Shopee, our media partners, Bloomberg Line, and sued. Ladies and gentlemen, a special thanks to the organizations of this, which organized this conference. Thanks to this valuable institutional support, I will now invite to the floor for the opening of the conference the President and CEO of American Society and the Council of the Americas, Mrs. Susan Siegel.
Gain access to government officials, experts, and senior-level executives to work together on pressing issues like finance, energy, technology, trade, and regional integration at a time of innovation for the green economy and artificial intelligence. Bogotá, Brasília, Buenos Aires, Lima, Mexico City, Monterrey, Panama City, Santiago, Sao Paulo, Asunción, Santo Domingo, Montevideo, and more. Join us in 2023 as we bring the region together. We connect the Americas. Corporate members have opportunities for sponsorship with exclusive access and brand exposure benefits.
Bom dia, good morning. You've now heard the extent of my Portuguese in my speech. I want to give a very, very warm welcome to Ambassador Maria Laura Rocha, Secretaria Ejecutiva de Relaciones Exteriores. Muchas gracias por estar con nosotros. To the very distinguished ministers, secretaries, legislators, members of the diplomatic community, American Society, Council of the Americas, members, journalists, and special guests that are here with us today. I also want to welcome, as always, everyone who is watching us online today. We are streaming live on our website, on Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube, and this will also be available on an ongoing basis as content and substance to look up after the conference. A special thank you to our sponsors for making this day possible, and our collaborating organizations and media partners for their support. Finally, I want to thank my amazing team for all of your hard work in putting this conference together. It is my absolute pleasure to be back in Brasília for the third time with our Latin American cities conferences. With inflation under control, a stronger than expected economic activity in the first half of the year, and economic reforms advancing through Congress, investors are increasingly optimistic about Brazil's economy. We see investment opportunities in so many areas: infrastructure, agriculture, energy, mining, technology, fintech, healthcare, and so many other sectors. According to The Economist, in 2022, Brazil received over $91 billion of foreign direct investment, making it the 5th largest investment destination in the world. This was double the amount received in 2021, and we expect 2023 and 24 to continue to increase foreign direct investment. Brazil is critical for the global food supply. It's the 3rd largest exporter of agricultural products, behind the European Union and the United States. Brazil has made active efforts and commitments in promoting sustainable development that also promotes economic growth. At COP26, the country announced a long-term objective to reach net zero emissions by 2050 and a 50% carbon emissions reduction plan coupled with a zero illegal deforestation target by 2030. Quite ambitious. Brazil is in a unique position as a custodian of the Amazon rainforest and its extraordinary biodiversity. Nearly 2/3 of the Amazon land area is actually in Brazil. As part of the Amazon Cooperation Treaty, ACTO, President Lula hosted the latest summit in Belém, where the group signed a joint declaration laying out a roadmap to promote sustainable development and fight organized crime in the Amazon. There is still so much potential to be a global leader in renewable energy. Brazil accounts for 7% of the planet's renewable energy production, and 80% of electrical generation actually already comes from renewables, and has long been a leader in biofuels and hydropower technologies. From a global perspective, investors see Brazil as a major opportunity. It has the second largest consumer market in the Americas after the United States. Its tax reform aimed at restructuring the country's complex consumption taxes is making its way through Brazil's legislature and is estimated to boost GDP by 1.5% within the first year per the central bank. Brazil has infrastructure and is committed to expanding and improving it. And most of all, just like my country, the United States, it is a continental country with a diversified economy. And it also has a strategic geographic position that allows easy access to other South American countries, providing leadership for Mercosur. Today, we look forward to hearing from decision makers and a number of leaders from the private sector on some of these opportunities for sustainable growth in the country. We are again so delighted to be back in Brasília. The last time we were here was 2019, which seems like an eternity because it was pre-COVID, creating space once again in person for dialogue between the public and private sector. We look forward to a continued dialogue in Brazil, the United States, and throughout the hemisphere. Thank you very, very much for being here, those of you in person and those of you virtually. Enjoy the conference.
Muito obrigado à senhora.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Susan Siegel. We will now begin the first speech of the conference. We have the honor of inviting to the floor Ambassador Maria Laura da Rocha, General Secretariat of External Relations of Brazil. Thank you. Good morning, Mrs. President, CEO of the Council of the Americas, Mrs. Minister of the Science and Technology, Luciana Santos. I don't know if she's already there, but ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank the invitation to speak about the agenda of external relations of Brazil for inclusive and sustainable growth of Brazil. I will begin underlining the correlation between the external and internal plans in order to remind us that external policies are public policies which has priorities defined by the President of the Republic and the general principles of Brazil, which are found in the Constitution of 1998. According to our principles, the international relations of our countries need to be backed up by national independence, prevalence of human rights, Pacific negotiations and integration of Latin America. And as a public policy, it's important that external policies be guided by the development of our country and the benefits for Brazilian society. Brazilian diplomacy is recognized internationally due to its consistent actions in order to amplify development opportunities in Brazil, in economically and financially speaking, but also financially, environmentally, and educationally. When I started, Lula took office in January, he made it very clear what were his priorities: to combat hunger, inequalities, and extreme poverty, sustainable development and in all its economical, social, environmental dimensions, defense of democracy, the promotion and defense of human rights, and the tackling of the climate crisis. In the international plan, the President established as the main objective the recovery of the image and the place of Brazil as the main players amongst the nations. And he guided Minister Mauro Vieira to use its diplomatic capital in order to build bridges which were burnt during the last 4 years, diplomatically speaking. So in order to increase Brazilian actions in favor for a democratic global leadership, and in order to reapproximate with Latin American countries, seeking feasible alternatives in order to increase integration of the region. So the objectives of external policies help to create spaces of opportunity which will allow the adoption of internal measures guided towards national development and the improvement of the lives of Brazilians. It is important to be clear that the priorities of external policies in Brazil are were in a turbulent context due to the climatic crisis and COVID-19, due to the trade dispute between U.S. and China, and the war between Russia and the Ukraine. And this ensemble of factors has caused instability in the markets, increase of inflation, of food security, and intensification and use of fossil fuels, and the process of energetic transitions, and pressure for reorganization of global food chains. So since January, the Ministry of Foreign Relations has dedicated itself to implement external policies determined by President Lula. So in the first 7 months of the year, we had more than 30 bilateral meetings and 60 chancellor meetings, and in many international meetings other than 2 chiefs of state summits organized by Brazil with countries of the region. And the last one, which ended a few days ago in the city of Belém, with countries which share the Amazon forest and are part of the organization of ACTO, the Amazon Treaty. So this was announced by the president. The concern with the Amazon was announced when he took office, and even before he took office in Egypt, and it affirming that Brazil would restart engaging itself actively in order to revert the increase of deforestation which occurred in the last years, and that really negatively affected Brazil's credibility abroad. So as he organized the summit, the Brazilian government managed to organize and meet and gather chiefs of state of the Amazon countries. And it was necessary to establish new bases for cooperation and coordinate actions of the 8 countries which share the biggest forest in the planet. So with an exemplar, a very positive demonstration about the national possibilities, the summit also had Amazon dialogues, which were an ensemble of 400 events with civil society, private sector, academia, and municipal, state, and federal spheres. Other than this, the cooperation agencies presented their plans for the regions, and national and international banks of development also launched a green coalition in order to ease access to credit for small and medium enterprises, in order to leverage developments, critical infrastructure, and the creation of employment in the Amazon region. So the 3 days of events organized by the General Secretariat of the Presidency's office involved many stakeholders and interests, with a special attention to the Amazon people. And so it was a real exercise of participative democracy regarding the challenges of the integrated development of the Amazon region in all its dimensions: cities, forests, people, research and innovation, and traditional knowledge. The Declaration of Belém, the final document of the summit, has more than 100 paragraphs where we confirm the intention of the 8 countries members of ACTO in order to advance a common agenda of cooperation based upon sustainable development and social inclusion. So the communication of the containers of tropical forests reinforce their commitment with ecological transition, which is fair, seeking common ground in different international forums. The diplomatic initiative in Brazil is based upon its internal priority is aligned with international consensus that Brazil managed to create. So the Ministry of Environment announced during the summit a reduction of 42.5% of deforestation in the Amazon when compared with the same period last year. And President Lula and Minister of Income also announced a growth acceleration program, the PAC. The plan will help Brazil to manage to reach its objectives due to the issues which were connected to the greenhouse effect in order to improve technology, stimulate bioeconomy, and energetic transition. These are the priorities that will guide Brazilian foreign policy and when we take a look at the objectives that have been met in the 2030 agenda. In COP28 of climate change and the work which will be developed until 2025 when COP30 will occur in Brazil. And Brazil, as being a candidate in order to host this event, was another diplomatic demonstration of Lula government to recover the place Brazil had as a main player in the international spheres. So working with social inclusion towards sustainable development, this will help us reach these goals. And so this program, this objectives will be working for 2024. And it's the first time Brazil will be presiding the biggest mechanism which works with issues since 2009. The G20 is considered today as the main forum of consultation of economic policies and the biggest political impulsor of economical and financial institutions. During the Brazilian presidency of the G20, the meetings will have a priority of ensuring that the financing of sustainable development actions and climate actions be directed to countries which are developing and less developed countries. There will not be ecological transition with sustainability without financing and political incentives. And thanks to looking at the energetic transition, it's important to assure space for industrial policies in the developing countries, which cannot be simply connected to being exporting in the primary sector. So thanks to the centrality of the sustaining programs, agriculture, and the strengthening of family agriculture in the international debates for combating hunger and promotion of food security. So the external policies are anchored in the national programs of food acquisition, of school feeding, and the strengthening of family farming, and also the SAFRA plan that has a record values in sustainable agricultural systems. So starting from the right of having adequate feeding and the right to receive accessible food, we will continue defending fair trade, fair agricultural trade in a sustainable fashion in order to promote biodiversity and climate change. So it's very clear for the productive sector in Brazil that there will not be agriculture in Brazil without the Amazon forest. So in the same way, there will only be production of food within the limits of sustainability of the country. The country will need to actively engage itself in the international discussions concerning the agreed concept of bioeconomy, which promotes innovation and research and enables access to credit and financing for local producers, especially those who live from social biodiversity. We know that trade and investments are fundamental sectors for energetic transition and are necessary for growth of the country. Exportations have an important role in balancing the trade balance, and this is why development of multilateral issues, eliminating hurdles and distortions of international trade.
The strengthening of the World Organization and for the opening of new markets of Brazilian products, and also the diversification of the export technology included in it. Together with the Brazilian Agency of Promotion of Exports, APEX, the sectors of the promotion of Brazilian promotion in all of the embassies here in Brazil keep working with the private initiative to promote Brazilian products and to attract foreign investments to the country in the energy sector, infrastructure, telecommunications, and industrial production, just to name a few. And the team of trade, international trade of Itamaraty, in tandem with other ministries and other companies, remains very attentive to the positioning of Brazil in the international scenario of reallocation of supply chains in the world in order to attract investments for the digital transformation of the industry and the manufacturing in the country of high added value products, especially of semiconductors. Special attention is shown to the depths of the integration of the American countries. And here in the second semester, Brazil will be the president of Mercosur, in which we're going to be working to strengthen the bloc, especially integrating and deepening the regional integration. In this sense, we'd like to broaden the spaces of participation of the associated states, that with the other party members are comprised of the whole American continent. With this situation, Brazil has the potential to act in favor of the regional infrastructure, and especially in the regulatory and framework aspects. They are fundamental for larger products such as the transportation paths. And we'll also be working with the member states to work with the regulation in the productive sectors and to advance in the review of the common foreign tariffs in the 8th round of services and products, and in the strengthening of the fund of structure. Even though Mercosur has a free zone, a trade zone, in practice, we're going to keep trying to deepen it and to improve our agreements with the economic agreements with the other Latin American countries. We'll also be expanding our extra-regional trade agreements with other countries, and we are trying to finalize the European agreement and with the European Free Association of Trade and Singapore. And we're going to continue with the negotiations with Canada, South Korea, UAE, Vietnam, and other countries that are interested. And it's important for Brazil that to support this integration in between the sustainable development and trade subjects, and making sure that these environmental measures will not be considered restrictive and should not be used as a restrictive manner to restrict the foreign trade. President Lula's agenda is centered in social inclusion and development in the Brazilian state. It promotes the return of the sustainable development and the fight against hunger and inequalities to be at the center of the international agenda. The economic transition or energy is also important in many aspects. There are many different challenges and many opportunities as well. No other country will be able to solve alone these issues, and it's imperative for the countries to work together based on international governance that is truly democratic. The agenda of Brazil for inclusive growth and sustainable growth includes, from the perspective of foreign policy, constant dialogue with all the countries of the American continent, with the purpose to identify spaces to act together and adoption of measures that will generate mutual benefits. the role of the private sector, civil society, and academia in the states as drivers of public policies that have the collective good at its center is fundamental. Spaces of dialogue such as this one here that are promoted by the Council of Americas are essential. And it's with the frank debate of ideas that will show us the ideas to implement them. I wish you a very successful event and a great debate to all of you. Thank you very much for your attention.
Obrigado, secretário-geral.
Thank you, General Secretariat, for your speech. Now we're going to have the remarks of Miss Elizabeth Bagley, Ambassador in Brazil of the United States, that will be broadcast in the screen.
I regret that I'm not able to attend in person. I know this morning will be filled with many fruitful discussions. The United States and Brazil partnered to advance our common interests, including expanding trade and investment, combating the climate crisis, and promoting social inclusion and democracy. We look forward to celebrating 2 centuries of diplomatic relations next year, and we take immense pride in our bedrock foundation of shared democratic values. The challenges impacting people across the hemisphere demand increased global cooperation. Challenges like combating the climate crisis, promoting economic resilience, and addressing widespread social disparities can only be solved by working together. The United States government is committed to working with Brazil and others to help address these pressing issues. Brazil has a critical role to play as a leader in regional cooperation. Today, you will hear about Brazil's agenda for inclusive and sustainable growth. This is a topic that is at the forefront of our collaboration with Brazil, and I would like to provide you with some updates on our work on this agenda. Countering the climate crisis is a top priority for President Biden and also for President Lula. They discussed this issue in person together in the White House 6 weeks after Lula's inauguration. An essential component of our bilateral partnership includes USAID's $130 million Partnership for Conservation of Amazon Biodiversity, which works with the Brazilian government, private sectors, and other local partners to expand innovative solutions for the forest economy. Our Clean Energy Industry Dialogue, launched last year, allows for new initiatives on clean energy driven by our dynamic private sector partners. We applaud President Lula's ambitious pledge to end deforestation by 2030, and we celebrate the results to date. Deforestation in Brazil's Amazon fell by almost 34% in the first 6 months of President Lula's term, compared with the same period last year. Now and in the future, the U.S. government will continue to rally the private sector, other nations, international organizations, philanthropy, and other stakeholders to support Brazil's climate ambition. Estamos juntos. We are in this together. The private sector is a critical source of strength in our relationship. We estimate that our bilateral trade and investment supports at least 530,000 jobs in Brazil and promotes prosperity in both our countries. 2 key factors drive this job creation. First, the United States is Brazil's largest trading partner in value-added goods. The second critical factor is foreign direct investment. The United States invests more than $192 billion in Brazil, more than any other nation on earth. That's almost $1 trillion reais. The Brazilian private sector has named the United States as its preferred business partner, and U.S. investment in Brazil covers a wide range of sectors and industries, generating more business opportunities, higher paying local jobs, and a greater impact on the Brazilian economy. We look forward to participating in the Defense Industry Dialogue and the U.S.-Brazil Commercial Dialogue later this year, and we seek to schedule the next plenary of the U.S.-Brazil CEO Forum in the coming months. Finally, we are committed to working with Brazil to support social inclusion. This is why, in May, the United States and Brazil relaunched the Joint Action Plan to eliminate racial and ethnic discrimination and promote equality, also known as JAPER. JAPER's work plan focuses on 4 bilateral priorities for marginalized communities: increasing access to education, providing greater access to health care, addressing violence and promoting justice, and nurturing culture and preserving memory. In closing, while we have had many early successes over the last 8 months, we still have much work left to do. We are at an important moment for the relationship between Brazil and the United States that holds the potential to make tremendous advances in the areas of trade, climate, sustainability, and inclusivity that will benefit the entire world. And I welcome you as investors, executives, and policymakers to be part of this historic moment. Thank you.
Essas foram as palavras da embaixadora.
These were the remarks of the ambassador of Brazil, American in Brazil, is Elizabeth Bagley. Now continuing with our schedule, we're gonna go to a speech of the Minister of Science, Technology and Innovation, Minister Luciana Santos.
Gente, muito bom dia a cada e a cada de
Good morning, everyone present here. I'd like to salute Susan Siegel, the President of the Council of America, Elizabeth Bagley, Ambassador of the U.S. here in Brazil, that just spoke, our dear Ambassador Maria Laura da Rocha, General Secretary of the Foreign Affairs Ministry, and to salute everyone here and that are members, corporate members of the Council of Americas, and all of the guests here, the special guests that came here. For me, it's an honor to be part of this conference, to talk about the policies of science, technology, and innovation as the pillars of the economic development and social development in Brazil on sustainable basis. We know that here in Brazil, our economy and to change wealth through the investment of science and technology and development of products and innovative products, and the investments in research create a circle, a virtuous cycle in which the sciences that are produced means more innovation, more productive companies, and an economy that is more competitive. Historically, Brazilian science has always faced periods of great challenges demanding from society, the academia and scientific societies vigorous attempts in terms of not dismembering or dismantling this structure. But the previous cycle was especially perverse in terms of denying science and the benefits of science to humankind, and especially promoting the blackout in society. The members of the government are trying to reverse the damages caused in the policy of contingency, and we now have the lead role in the Ministry of Science and Technology as the driver of the technological and scientific development in Brazil, in articulation with other federal entities, states and municipalities, state companies and private companies, universities and scientific institutions. The transversal or cross-cutting actions of the MCTI and its capacity to pull together these fundamental stakeholders help in these areas to lead or to drive our social indicators and science indicators, because there is no doubt that Brazil has a very strong and very powerful system in terms of scientific production, and that's why we always fought any concept that would disqualify our system. It is responsible for 90% of the scientific production in the country, when we consider all of the institutes and the public and universities throughout the country. What we have now is What's important is to translate the scientific knowledge into products and services, because we are the 57th country in this situation, and it's important to reverse this paradox. And we also aim to reduce the regional asymmetries and also to improve the quality of lives of people, especially through the access to science and technology benefits. And in this sense, we adopted a group of measures that is consistent, providing response to demands that were very urgent and to which we were committed in providing response in the first 100 days of government, providing scholarships and research and to academia that benefited 258,000 students in CAPES. And this scholarship was not increased in 10 years, and we provided 590 million reais in other research, in other areas of research, which is the largest amount released so far. We also started with the first public contest or civil service selection for the MCTI and the institutes that are part of its infrastructure. Two other achievements were important for fostering the science and innovation in Brazil. The reduction of the interest rates for companies and the National Fund for Science and Technology that was reinstated. We managed to pass it. The fund that is refundable in this type of in this fund would be indexed to the base rate, and that is, in other words, we managed to get 2 billion reais that were released for the funding of innovation, especially in the part that is reimbursable. But 2 other billion were also made available for the part that non-refundable. With this recomposition, the National Fund had 10 billion reais available for investment in the year of 2023. That is, this amount shows that the cheap credit, will be able to help us create this virtuous cycle for the economy to encourage investment and drive development in many other productive areas. Besides, we already count on with the approval of the annual plan through which the FNDCT has priorities, and the Council of the FNDCT approved these 10 programs and structuring agendas that are going to be the pillars of the public policies in science and technology in the coming years. These programs have been articulated with the other parts of the National Strategy for Science and Technology for the years 2024 to up to 2030. The new guidelines have 4 main axes: recovery, expansion, and consolidation of the national system of science and technology, reindustrialization on new bases, and support provided to the companies, science and technology for programs and strategic agendas, and science and innovation and technology for the national development and social development. We also understand that the resources of NDCT will be made available in order to help a more sustainable country through very big and structuring programs focusing on the modernization of our infrastructure, generating innovation, and allowing for training for our human personnel that envisage to enable and train and to guarantee scientific and technological security for critical sectors of the Brazilian sovereignty. Through these projects, we're going to drive these impacts of this fund in order to achieve the goals that are aligned with the government policies and the challenges in society and the insertion of Brazil also in the international scenario. I'd like to also highlight the multi-purpose reactor here in Brazil in terms of production of radioisotopes for nuclear medicine. I also would like to highlight the creation of the satellite Simile-6 and the National Laboratory of High Contention of biological contention that were included in the national program that was launched on Friday. 2 Fridays ago. So until 2026, PAC is going to invest 1 trillion and 700 billion reais in all of the regions in the country. The MCTI is also completely integrated with the effort of implementation of the new industrial policy that has a perspective to overcome the technological delay in terms of trying to investing in new technology and promoting in fostering innovation. And there are some examples of industrial countries that produce a lot of technology and science that only achieved this condition considering a lot of effort that was promoted by the state involving public policies to foster science, industry, and technology. And this effort is not a consequence only of pandemic and current intentions. That is something permanent in the story, in the history of industrialized countries. The geopolitical context that is marked with rivalries and many crises have evidenced the fragility of the of the international supply chains, and they increase the competitivity in the technological domain and in terms of technologies, and this have and because the effects of the perverse effects of dependence of developing countries, they have stood out now. A country that has very strong industry with good results and subsidies will generate more opportunities for employment and demand for qualifications by the workers, and that is the goal of government Lula in articulating the industrial and scientific policies. In this sense, the MCTI integrates the Council of National Industrial Development that starts working after 7 years again, and with the perspective to build a new industrial policy that is inclusive, innovative, that is based on 6 parts: the promotion of sustainable agro-industrial supply chains, the economic industrial complex healthcare to reduce the vulnerabilities of SUS and to expand the access to healthcare in a way that we have deficits and that is almost $20 billion in terms of amount. Infrastructure, sanitation, housing, and sustainability also for the big cities. The digital transformation in industries to help the production, bioeconomy, decarbonization, and energy transition, and energy security to guarantee resources for the next generations. Technologies that are in the national interest. And these missions, they are a consequence of many social problems, and they are important for the development of the country. Out of the 106 billion reais that is going to be invested in the new industrial policy in the forthcoming years, MCTI is going to destine 41 billion reais to encourage and foster innovation in private companies. And another tool that we have is the law of goodness, or the good law, that has 27 billion reais in this year. And this is amount that is 4 times the amount of the fiscal amount that was benefited many companies in the country. That is, for each real of tax concession, the companies invested 4 reais in research and development, and the companies in the law of goodness will invest 11% more than if they didn't have this benefits. I would like to anticipate that by the number of companies that have sent the information for the MCTI, we might have the increase of 37% of the resources that were collected last year, and it represented the largest increase since the passing of the bill. Ladies and gentlemen, the new international situation is also related to the facing global problems, as the previous speakers mentioned here, that I could follow. Climate events that are extreme, droughts, elevation of the sea levels, health scares, and food security. These are challenges that are not contained by borders, and they will only be solved with international cooperation in science, technology, and innovation. By rescuing the protagonism of Brazil in the world, President Lula attributes to scientific cooperation a special status in his government. I had the privilege to go in 3 missions to abroad in Argentina, Uruguay and China, Portugal and Spain. And we signed memorandum of understandings for cooperation in areas that are strategic, such as quantum science, IA, climate change, renewable energies, bioeconomy, space, and new materials. The guidelines of the Brazilian government of President Lula is very clear in terms of relaunching and strengthen the regional integration, especially through commitments through mechanisms that is such as CELAC, to which Brazil returned in January, and the cooperation of Mercosur as well. We reminded that the next few years are going to be of the utmost relevance, so the country can project its leadership in science. And 2024, Brazil will take the leadership of this institution, and this year actually, the year of December of 2023 actually. In 2025, Brazil will be the president in BRICS and will host the climate summit in Belém. Our goal is to face all of these challenges in order to be a technological and scientific powerhouse. We have to invest in facing the loss of biodiversity and the facing climate change challenges, digital transformation, biotechnology, and overcoming hunger and inequalities as well. I also would like to remember that concerning BRICS, President Lula made the decision that the new president of BRICS, former President Dilma Rousseff, the new development bank of BRICS, and today is a day that I celebrate because former President Dilma was absolved of the criminal charges, and this once again, this new political cycle shows that is committed to the public spirit. Our goal in this context is, and we are going to hold we held the Amazon Summit in an event that had all of the leaderships in the Latin America and the countries that border the Amazon. The cooperation in this area which encompasses 60% of our territory. It shows the responsibility of our government to public policies, strategic projects, and specific actions in favor of this huge area in terms of its conservation. The sustainable development of the Amazon is a goal of the Ministry of Science and Innovation, and there are many actions concerning it that want to perfect the technological improvement that is able to increase the quality of the population living in this area. After the Amazon Summit, during the Amazon Summit, we presented the initiatives to build a scientific agenda for the region, besides a robust program of science and technology and innovation. This program that we call Mais Ciência, or More Science in Portuguese, has 3.4 billion reais that is going to be invested between 2024 and 2026, with the perspective to recover and consolidate the research infrastructure to improve the system of monitoring of the Amazon. And we were very successful in this semester. In the 7 months of the government Lula, we reduced in 42% the deforestation, as the American ambassador has mentioned, and to supporting the innovation of technology chains, increase the food security, expand connectivity and digital access to attract researchers and to preserve our wealth in that area. And this program contemplates all of these areas for R&D and priority topics for the national development, and I'm not going to repeat them here because I've already mentioned them here over the speech, which is transition, energy, and other aspects. And here the biodiversity is also very important, and for the technologies and bioeconomies that are innovative for exploitation of the natural resources of the Amazon. Other resources are going to be destined to the small towns and to bring more infrastructure to the community, to the vulnerable communities, for repatriation of talents and for digitalization and preservation of assets. And we're going to support the family agriculture through encouragement and through the protection of the traditional peoples and the communities. We want to provide solutions for the scientific challenges and to aggregate value to the products for the traditional communities. With these investments and other initiatives that were mentioned in the conference, we reaffirm the commitment of MCTI to produce more scientific knowledge and to use our best technological capacities to face the contemporary and the modern challenges to generate wealth and for a better future of Brazil and the world. Thank you very much.
We'd like to thank the speech of Minister Luciana Santos. We will now be beginning our first panel in a few moments. Founded in 1965 by David Rockefeller, the Council of the Americas is an organization, international organizations of business, which the members share the commitment of social and economic development and democracy all over the region. COA has more than 200 members, which are corporate members which work in different sectors such as the financial sector, technological, industrial, national resources, infrastructure, pharmaceutical companies, amongst others. The main headquarters of COA is in New York, and we also have offices in Washington, D.C. and Miami. COA has a long tradition in promoting Brazil and opportunities of investment in our country. Through public-private partnerships, analyses and publications and other initiatives, the Council of the Americas is always seeking to strengthen the connections and incentivize dialogue between the public and private sectors of Brazil in the federal, state, and municipal spheres. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now continue to the panel in sustainability in partnership and cooperation between companies and government in Brazil. We now invite to the floor the president of Talanoa Institute and the moderator of this panel, Mrs. Natalie Understill.
Convidamos também o secretário nacional do Meio.
We'd also like to invite the National Secretary of Environmental Development, Ministry of Environment and Climate Change, Mr. Adalberto Maluf. Thank you.
O vice-presidente.
The Vice President of Public Policies of the Americas of the company Amazon Web Services, Shannon Kellogg. Thank you. Global Head Corporate Relations of Suzano Pulp and Paper, Mrs. Mariana Lisboa. And Vice President and General Manager of Kellogg's Brazil, Mr. Alberto Reich. Ladies and gentlemen, we would like to welcome the panelists and would like to invite you all to take your seats, and we will now give a warm welcome to the moderator of the Institute Talanoa, Mrs. Natalie Understill. Good morning to you all. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to be here with you today and with a super panel in order to discuss an issue which is not only a simple mere theme, but is also something which is certainly very important, not only within the structure of the federal government, but also amongst company for a very good reason. We have numerous challenges of sustainability today, and from water, climate issues, there is really a great pressure and visibility in society with regards with what needs to be done. And I would like to bring one example. A few years ago, in 2015, there was an agreement between 197 nations, which was signed, the famous Paris Agreement, which defined that we need to reduce to zero the liquid emissions until the half of the century. So literally, we need to decarbonize very quickly all the emissions of all the sectors. And nowadays, more than 90% of the global GDP has already assumed engagements in this nature called net zero commitments. And Brazil also is committed to reducing our emissions to zero until 2050. And we also have intermediate objectives as well and goals. And of course, since Brazil is located in the middle of the biggest forest in the world, we have a major commitment on this regard. And the Minister of Science and Technology mentioned this today, of really reaching zero deforestation as well. And it's very necessary because we have a whole other realm of other issues which are appearing, like, for example, how the forest can sustain itself in a warmer climate with an stable climate. And we know that even if Brazil manages to zero deforestation, and we support this initiative, this will not be enough for us to manage to reach our intermediate goals. So we need to reach zero deforestation and also advance with energetic transition, including all the industries and fields. This goes through waste management, circular economy, and agriculture, which is a very important sector in the country. So we are going through this defining moment of systemic change and does not depend on a sole stakeholder. It's not worth only one company being ambitious or just the government being ambitious. We need to have radical collaboration amongst all parties. And this panel brings about this objective of discussing what has been done on this sense. So it's a pleasure to talk to these great panelists, and I would like to begin with a general question that I'd like all of you to answer concerning the ambition of each one of you. What each company, and we'll also be listening to the Ministry of Environment, what is the ambition of each stakeholder regarding this transition, so that it's not a mere transition of energy sources, but it can be inclusive and qualify our development. Shannon, I will start with you. Amazon has a commitment of becoming water positive, and I would also like to invite you to bring examples, not only of this problematic, but also of climate actions that you have been developing at the moment. Thank you.
I would also like to thank the Council of Americas for sponsoring this event today and for all of your participation. It's great to be here. Amazon has, for a number of years, really tried to take a leadership role on climate change issues globally. Several years ago, we started what's called the Climate Pledge, and we were the founder of the Climate Pledge. Today, we have now 400 organizations, companies, large corporations that have signed on to that pledge. And so we've really tried to be a leader just by establishing that. But we're committed to doing so much more. Part of the Climate Pledge effort, by the way, includes a climate fund that we established in 2020 of $2 billion that we're investing in startups and innovative technologies in this space. But we're also, as our colleague said, making a real push into other sustainability areas like water preservation. You may know that Amazon overall, and particularly the business that I focus on, Amazon Web Services, does use water to cool its data centers and in its operations. And we announced late last year that we are going to be water positive by 2030 in every community that we operate in. And that's very relevant here in Brazil because Brazil happens to be one of the first countries in the world where we established outside of the US what we call an infrastructure region for our Amazon Web Services business. And what that means is that we're putting data centers in here, a lot of them, as part of our Amazon Web Services operations, and we use water to cool those systems. And so our intent in every community that we operate in is to turn more water than we've taken, and that includes in places that we operate, providing recycled water so it can be used for agriculture purposes and by farmers around the world. And so we're really looking forward to continuing those efforts here in Brazil. We also have a very, what I would call an aggressive renewable energy strategy across Amazon. Amazon Web Services, again, being a very significant user of power, has for a number of years had this long-term goal. We originally were trying to become 100% renewable energy powered in our data center infrastructure around the world by 2030, and we've pushed that up to 2025. Again, the relevance here in Brazil, we have significant data center operations here, and we've actually announced a very large-scale renewable energy solar farm here in Brazil. And we're looking to continue to make investments in that space. And of course, we use the hydropower here as well, and we count that as part of our renewable energy goals. And so we're really serious about not just talking about these issues, but investing and spending a lot of time and resources trying to implement initiatives that will make a big difference. And then we'll talk a little bit later, I think, about some of the things that we're trying to do around rainforest preservation and some of those initiatives.
Obrigada. Alberto, como que uma empresa de alimentos...
Alberta, how a food supply company is trying to contribute? What are the challenges you've been facing? Thank you very much. I think we have many challenges. We have a company of more than 117 years of age. And since the beginning, we always spoke about how we want to have a positive footprint, and with many components. Of course, one of them is sustainability of our operations. Especially today, we have a commitment, and most of our commitments for 2030, and we began already with agriculture. We believe in the development of small business farmers, family farmers, and not only with production, and production needs to be sustainable. So our commitment is to work with more than 1 million small farmers, and this is have assumed already very important part of this commitment. We believe we can do things better and within our operations with our supply chain. So we have more than 10 years been developing partnerships in Brazil, for example, with maize producers in order to foster sustainable agriculture, but not only to avoid deforestation, but assure that the lands that are cultivated are cultivated in an optimal manner. So our commitment as a company is not only what we do in our installations, but all our supply chain is making it become a responsible chain, and we seek to incentivize this, and we have the chance of expanding to potato business as well, and 100% Brazilian personnel working in a sustainable manner in developing potato plantation. And in our operations, we also, within our suppliers, we are working with improving our impact. And we also recognize that we have very aggressive goals. We want to reduce our emissions in 45% until 2030. And we also are doing important and considerable investments. And part of our new technologies have this component. So as we grow in Brazil, our technologies bring components which are more sustainable in nature. And I believe this is a very positive path. As a company, I believe we have the responsibility, and the most important, we have the partners, not only in our supply chain, but also partners within government in order to provide and develop new technologies to become more sustainable. Thank you. Mariana, I'd like to pass the floor to you. Mariana from Suzano Pulp and Paper. I'd like you to comment as well as the mission of your company, and also I'd like to add a small differential, which is how the change in perception of the consumer and of today we have access to the social media, and people can pressure through social media, systemically, individually. So how has this been impacting your company, and how does this reflect on the goals of Suzano Pulp and Paper? So first of all, I'd like to congratulate uh, congratulating the COA, the Congress of the Americas. This is very rare that we have 4 women presiding. This really deserves to be registered. So thank you very much. Natalie is speaking specifically about Suzano Pulp and Paper. We are a multinational, 100% Brazilian multinational. We will soon be 100 years old, and we have companies all over the country in Bahia, Maranhão, Ceará, all over the country in the state of Mato Grosso do Sul. And we have the biggest investment occurring in Mato Grosso do Sul, a 20 billion reais investment in the state of Mato Grosso do Sul. And we occupy about 2 million hectares and 1 million of planted forest and another million hectares of conservation forest. And so we know that not only are we big, the bigger we are, the more responsibility we hold. And we launched public goals, all connected to the development goals of the United Nations and connected to an ODS, a pillar of the Sustainable Development Goals. So we have social, governance, and sustainable pillars, and we have the ambition, which is to reach until 2025 removing 40 millions of greenhouse gases of the atmosphere, and until 2030 reducing in 15% our emissions. We also like to underline that Suzano is a company, a net zero company, and we are capable of neutralizing 100% of our emissions, but we are not satisfied yet. We want to improve, increasingly doing more and better. And this has a lot to do with our consumers. At Suzano, we say that there is no such thing as bioproducts, because we understand that planted forest for industrial use is bioeconomy. So there is no such thing as bioproducts without a bio-consumer. So our business is guided towards what the consumers require from us. And so good practices, environmental commitments, diversity, and Suzano has public objectives which are connected to inclusion of women, and 40% of Suzano's debt is connected to commitments connected to sustainability. We were the first company in Latin America to emit sustainability bonds, which include the issue of women in positions of power. So if we do not reach our goals in 2030, our debt will increase. So it's a very genuine plan and genuine goals, which shows that not only in words, we are really working with actions, and we have sustainability at the core of our business strategy. And so I would like to register that I am part of this commitment of diversity of Suzano. I am a woman from the state of Bahia in a very male-oriented environment, and I have the possibility of being recognized, of growing, and having my capacities being recognized by the company. So Natalie, this is the ambition of Suzano. We want to become increasingly important example to the Brazil. Thank you very much, Mariana. Alberto, you can see that we're going through a phase of just speaking, but also towards actions. Companies are pressured by the consumer market, and at the same time by governments, because governments are asking for commitments from the behalf of companies. They're not compulsory. However, we can see pricification of emissions, and etc. So I would like to hear from you how the government, particularly the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change, how you are positioning yourselves and what are your priorities in this political cycle. Thank you very much, Natalie, for the invitation. I'd like to thank all of you for the opportunity to be here. Well, we can see that we are not only are we speaking about objectives and goals, we are implementing them, and we have a very transversal environmental policy. We have 9 ministries which are involved in climate change, environment, green economy, and half of the acts of President Lula did in the first day of government were about the environmental agenda. involving society broadly, creating CONAMA, the National Council of Environment, which is the broader council of society with more than 200 members. And today we had the meeting of the National Environmental Fund, for the first time participating with civil society. And so it's not simple. The fact that the Minister of Income and Revenue, the most important minister, he is the leader of the Ecological Transformation Plan, and the Vice President is the coordinator of economy and transition towards a green economy and green industry. So this is a transversal plan, and we are very, very pleased to see this transversal and joint efforts. And results are, we are reaching the results. In the first 7 months, we have had more than reduction of more than 42% of deforestation. And in the month of July, we had a record of 66% of diminishment of deforestation compared to last year. And so more than 200% of apprehensions and fines, environmental fines. And now we are going to the second phase of bioeconomy, developing furthermore environmental and sustainably built cities, increasing Amazon dialogues with the 20 mayors of the companies that of the cities that most suffer with deforestation. And we are creating a pact to zero deforestation at the same time that we are planning the creation of this new economy, which is forest-based and its assets. And we are always an environmental country. This is why the Minister Marina Silva coming back to power brought us a lot of hope.
And Brazil has always been a major player in renewable energy, and my friend in the Ministry of Mines and Energy, Barral. A few years back, I was at the council of the Brazilian section of the solar energy, and he was the president of EPE, Brazilian Energy Company. And Brazil had achieved 2 gigs of solar energy, and we were celebrating just 2 gigs. And last year, Brazil became the 4th largest solar market energy in the world. It went from the 10th to 4th now. So we're generating almost 25% of the energy that Brazil is consuming now. That comes from the wind and solar. And a few years ago, we had nothing. So Barral now is coordinating the energy transition plan with green transition, green energy. And everything points to the fact that Brazil will be one of the leaders in energy transition and the green energy. Just to sum up this first part of our participation, we have all the natural resources and everything to be in the leadership of this process. And the Plano Safra, the Safra plan or harvest plan, and it was announced with Marina and the Ministry of Agriculture, and it's one of the most sustainable ones that we've ever had in our government. CVM also nowadays blocks funding and resources for farmers or producers, agricultural producers that do not protect that allow deforestation. So Brazil is trying to be again in leadership. We'll be the president of the Mercosur, the BRICS. We are part of the G20. The climate emergency is also it's already a reality. Whenever you have a huge wildfire in the news and a climate event that was the largest one in history. So no wonder the PTA, the participative budget of the government that involves more than 1 million people. The first item, the one that was mostly voted by the Brazilian society, was climate emergency. And that goes to show that that's the program that is very representative and the agenda in the society, in the agenda of society. Brazil has an environmental leadership that is respectable and dialogues with the sectors of society. And we have the private companies that are trying to implement this principle, so we have a very favorable environment for these partnerships and of innovation. Definitely, it's very promising, Adalberto. I think it's a radical shift from the previous government in terms of the executive leadership. It's a very positive thing. So, but in practice, we know that there are many good examples of companies and governments cooperating innovating together, but it's not an easy thing. You should not take it for granted. You've been in the private sector and you've had this experience. I want to go into this area now. What is possible and what is being done? Shannon, how do you in the Amazon see and face this challenge concerning the use of land and deforestation in Brazil? Have you cooperated with the governments here in this sense?
The question. So again, this is just such a big priority for us. We know we can't do it alone, which is one of the reasons we established the climate pledge in the first place, to really be out there working across the private sector. But we also know that it's critical that we're working hand in hand with governments around the world. Here in Brazil, and we're looking forward to spending a lot more time in the coming years with the Lula administration. As was pointed out, you have really brought this back as a major priority, and we're thrilled about that as a big investor here in Brazil across the Amazon, and certainly Amazon Web Services. But one thing that we've really tried to do here locally is look for opportunities to partner with governments who are trying to really move the needle, not just at the national level, but also at the state and local level. And so the government of Para is a state-level government that we've built this partnership with, and we're really trying to make investments with them around rainforest preservation. And one of the things that Amazon has done more broadly, not just Amazon Web Services, is to invest 1.8 million in reais in specific grants with the government of Para to get those out to organizations who are working on rainforest preservation. We've also, on the AWS side, provided another $500,000 in local currency in AWS credits with those organizations in the local government to really try to help them as they work on these preservation initiatives. More broadly, we're investing at Amazon $100 million in the Right Now Climate Fund. And of course, there's a really strong focus of that initiative, which is a global initiative, but right here in Brazil, around Amazon rainforest preservation efforts. And so we've really tried to invest directly in that as well. And then more broadly, we've been now for several years working with the LEAF Coalition globally, and again, huge focus here in Brazil to work with both the local, state, and national governments on these issues. And so this is a huge focus of ours. We really are looking for more opportunities to partner up with government at the national level as well as at the state and local level. So consider us having a real interest in those conversations if anybody wants to have them right here in Brazil. Thank you.
Obrigada, Alberto. Como que a Kellogg pretende se somar?
Thank you, Alberto. How do you intend to sum to the efforts of with the national and subnational governments here in Brazil? Most of our work was with the partnership with the government. Recently, we made an expansion in our plants in Santa Catarina State, and we always say that we have to be close to the government and to have this constant dialogue so that these investments will have the best technologies and will enable us to reduce the impact and the water reduction and the gas emission. But the most important thing is how we usually do, how to improve the community and how to raise the awareness in these communities. The last investment was made of 50 million reais, and in this plant, and it now has all of these advanced technologies. But we do want to make partnerships with the federal government, which is a very important goal, and we also want to expand these partnerships. And I'd like to emphasize the work that to have this transparent communication, to have this opening to talk to private companies so we can establish partnerships in order to improve. It's not only the internal commitments of these companies, we have also the pledge to improve, but it's something that has to be broadened in order to work with the local governments. So it's making development, research and development programs and improvement of in the infrastructure so we can keep growing in a sustainable manner here in Brazil. Thank you. Mariana, what challenges do you see in this relationship with the government, and what is your perspective of these good winds that are blowing now in Brazil? Without a doubt, Suzano understands that its responsibility is not restricted to its limitations, to its boundaries, and within these public policies that we want to remove 200,000 people from the poverty thresholds. We want to remove them from poverty, and that in partnership with local governments, creating social programs, generating income. That's a responsibility of the company to share value. And from in the local perspective, I also mentioned the project in Cerrado, the Brazilian Savannah, in the small town in Mato Grosso do Sul. It's a town of 20,000 inhabitants. We have 10,000 collaborators or associates there. And of course, Suzano has to work with the municipal and the state government in order to prepare this town to receive these associates. And the other 4,000 associates that are going to be there, we're going to be living in the place that are working in the plant as well. So we need to help with building out schools and hospitals, improving the road infrastructure of the town. And that is an agenda that cannot be left out just to the government. It's an agenda that has to be worked, and we have to work on it together with the government. Now, considering the federal government, in COP27, we launched a new company called Biomes in partnership with 5 other companies, Vale, Santander, Itaú, Marfrig, and Hombing, in trying to restore 40 million hectares of native vegetation in 20 years. That is a very ambitious goal, and in order to enable to make this company able to do this, we need proper regulation of the carbon market. And this company is going to be viable with the monetization of the carbon market. And these are things that are important, but we will only be able to achieve these goals with partnerships between the government and the private companies. It's true, right? We see that there is a lot of willingness from both parties, and I believe that everyone has heard a few times that Brazil is going to adopt an ecological transformation. I think the plan was renamed, right, like ecological transformation plan. But I'm not really sure if everyone had the opportunity to understand or had access to understand this plan. So I'll put it on the spotlight. Alberto, can you explain to us about it? I know Thiago is going to mention about the energy transition component of this plan, but from society perspective, especially, it's important to understand what is intended, what's the goal, where do we want to get, and what the private sector can do using using the government guidelines. I believe that Minister Marina has been working very carefully with Minister Haddad in a very good partnership. And events, Minister Haddad speaks a lot about the environment, and then she says, after he speaks, can I talk about economics, because you spoke a lot about environment. And as we had PAC that was launched last week, government needs to have these programs in order to integrate and coordinate better the efforts. And due to the fact that our environmental policies are so cross-cutting and transversal, there are 19 ministries that they have in their guidelines. Green economy, energy transition, and many other things related to this area. So there are many groups in the government trying to start to implement this initiatives. So we need to create the governance and to structure the program so we know what the program has in the short, in the middle, and the long term, and to think about how civil society and the private sector fit into this planning. I believe that is the main goal, and it's no wonder that the Minister Haddad has chosen a special advisor just to take care of this. So he goes to every secretariat, and he talks about it, and he consolidates, and he says, you know what, in circular economy in residue management, we need this and that initiative. So it is an agreement. It is a search for a consensus of what's possible. So we know that no program is perfect during its execution, but naturally the government would like to have much more space to present to society, to listen, and that happens a lot in the big council that we have, right? There was a meeting yesterday, and the frequent meetings that we have of these working groups. So, but I think that the government, has especially in those axes, that structuring axis, the point of view, the point or the goal that we want to achieve. What are the topics that the government wants to move forward in, and to find out what are the other topics that we haven't planned for. For example, in my areas, such as environment and the urban environment, along with the MGK, we are coordinating this circular economy and solid residues group. It's an area that you need the help of 100% of the time the private sector. We have 5 degrees in the forum of on the packaging, on plastics, on cardboard and paper. There was the other one of glass that we have to change, and the decree on managing entities and structuring decree to integrate all of the other decrees as well. But we have no way of thinking of the goals of recycled targets in new products that we're going to have in all the sectors without talking to the private sector and without negotiating with it. Because I'm going to force industry, which is going to make this specific product, to have a specific content of recycled products. It's no way having a target that it's not achievable in the middle and the short term. I can say that a certain percentage of the packaging that will be recyclable or to be able to be recycled, and targets in recycling packages. But in order to implement, I need the state and the municipality, because the state and municipality are the ones that handle the solid residue policies. And there is the Ministry of the Environment, the Ministry of Cities in the federal levels. But these plans are extremely important because they force us to put in paper and to understand the challenges and to dialogue with everyone and the stakeholders involved in it. I see the work of the Ministry of Finances in the very good work that they perform in the technical work, and in the government. I believe we haven't carried out this dialogue with society yet, and to see what's viable or feasible, and especially that's why the program hasn't been launched yet. It is in this in this building and in the phase of being right up. And that I see all of the people in the Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of Science and Technology, and all the other areas from the Chief of Staff Cabinet. And I see that we have to hear now, and we have to hear the possibilities, and we have to consider a plan that is feasible, viable, and that will make the most of the potentials that Brazil has, so that it can be a big powerhouse in the green economy in the world. Okay, now to finalize here in the conference in 2023, in Brazil is going to hold the COP30, and there are many important issues, and we talked about the presidency of G20 and the leadership on Mercosur, but I'd like to ask you, and I'm going to start with Alberto now. Let's go from left to right. In a few words, what are your expectations and your wishes concerning what is going to happen? It's a very short period of time, 2.5 years, but especially for cooperation, for sustainability. What do you think should be should be achieved until COP30 in Belém? I'm an eternal optimistic. You know, we're talking about topics. Actually, we're not just talking about targets, we're making actions now. So it's a very important challenge, and in the next 2 years and a half, so we're definitely going to be able to do a lot more because we have clarity on what the government wants. We recognize that we have to make investments, so we need this framework and regulation to have more clarity regarding it. But we have to continue with the programs that we already have and to highlight that it's not just one company. And even we have the supply chains, and we're working within the supply chains, and I believe we're going to achieve these targets. Now we have to turn it, and in order to achieve this, we need growth, We need to have the capacity of investment, and it's a very good thing that Brazil will continue with the plans, the transformation plans, but will also have to continue with a healthy economy in order to make development available. Growth, investment, and agreements, right? Okay. Mariana, I'm also an optimistic, so I believe that until 2030 we'll be able to reposition ourselves in the international scenario with concrete actions that we've been taking. So we see the reduction in deforestation in the Amazon, and that has been seen very positively internationally. The arrival of President Lula was also considered something very positive. And I had the chance to go to the European Parliament, and I talked to many different members of Parliament, and I see the optimism concerning Brazil. So I believe that in 2030 we'll be able to have a very positive image that we desire, that we deserve, in order to drive this transition for a low carbon emission economy and to decarbonize the economy in 2050.
Again, for the invitation to today. It's been a really great discussion. Brazil has an incredible opportunity to continue to spur a lot of investment and innovation in this space. I failed to mention earlier, are the world's largest corporate buyer of renewable energy now, 3 years running, and we want to do more here in Brazil, and I'm sure there are many here on this panel and around the room and internationally want to continue to invest in Brazil, including in renewables and innovations in this space. And so there's a great opportunity with the leadership that this administration is showing to continue to attract investment, spur innovation, spur creation, and quite frankly, spur a lot more businesses across the economy here in Brazil, to really see the effects, not just in the big cities, but across the economy, including in states and localities where I know the administration is focused on driving even more innovation and job creation. And then I think there's a great opportunity bilaterally to do a lot more with the U.S. in this space. You have really like-minded presidents in Lula and Biden who are driving this as a major priority in their countries in the economy. And I think there's a great opportunity not only to work with Europe and others around the world, but to work bilaterally in this special relationship that you see between the U.S. and Brazil in this area. And I'd like to see more of that, and I think there will be a lot of progress and new initiatives over the next couple of years.
So just as we spoke about very important frameworks and like the Kyoto Protocol, we believe it's that the world reached consensus on decision making for robust decisions which are consistent and integrated with COP30. It will probably be the biggest COP in all history, and I believe we'll manage to deliver many results because society will be more aware. This was one of the worst year in terms of extreme events connected to increase in temperature, and 2025 and 2024 will probably be as well. So I believe society today is way more mature than before. A few years before, industry, government were dialoguing, however, with different perspectives. And nowadays, I feel that we're more aligned, and we see that the discourse of someone from government and from industry, that the private and government stakeholders, we are all going towards the same direction. So I believe we have a very important role to accomplish. This year, I participated in 3 to 4 different COP meetings. From the plastic agreement in Paris, and Brazil has a guiding role. Brazil is one of the few countries of the world that dialogues with Russia, China, and India, negotiates, discusses with them, and then speaks with the high emissions, Europeans, Americans, and others. So with the plastic agreements, I saw the plenary stop, and twice Brazilian Ambassador Maria Angelica, which will speak with Indian parties, listen to Russia, listen to China, and in both times we managed to unlock the negotiations and unstifle them. So I believe that we can manage to have this mediating role, and that we managed to negotiate well within the BRICS, the big major developing countries, with a unified position in assuming new commitments despite of historical issues and cultural issues that exist. I believe we have everything to accomplish very important agreements, because now it's not just an issue of industrial policies or markets or geopolitics. It's an issue of survival of our planet, the environmental issues and climate issue. It's a giant emergency, the loss and losing of biodiversity, global warming. There's nothing we really have to do everything we can so that at COP30 we reach very ambitious results, and that we reach a landmark in the second phase of the world path, making the curve of emissions go down in order to avoid increase in temperatures. Thank you very much. Very well. I will add now my expectations. Last year, when President Lula went to COP in Sharm el Sheikh, the slogan was "Brazil is back." So I believe that we reach at COP30 to say Brazil's not back, Brazil is better. I think that we have all the conditions to make this happen. So it was a great pleasure to be with all of you. Thank you very much to the panelists, and we will continue our program. Thank you.
Senhoras e senhores,
Ladies and gentlemen, the Council of the Americas thanks the President of Institute Talanoa, Mrs. Nathalie Unterstel, for moderating this panel of cooperation between companies and government in Brazil, aiming sustainability and partnerships. Ladies and gentlemen, now speaking about the initiatives of regional outreach, the Council of the Americas has broad outreach in all activities. We have the President Series, and every year we receive chiefs of state of Latin America for meetings with executives and investors, international investors, from all over the world, in the General Assembly of the United Nations. And recently, the Council of the Americas counted with the presence of the chiefs of state of Chile, Colombia, Argentina, Mexico, and many other countries of the region. And our Latin American cities conferences, we went to do private companies of the high-level governments and with regional CEOs. And COA also maintains traditional relationships and durable with the U.S. State Department, having hosted 52 editions of the Washington Conference of the Americas with the main leaderships of the American government. So, ladies and gentlemen, now continuing our agenda, it's a pleasure to invite to the floor National Secretariat of Energy Transition and Planning of the Ministry of Mines and Energy, Mr. Tiago Barral, and our reporter from Bloomberg, Marta Viotti Beck. Thank you very much.
Hello?
Thank you very much. Good morning to you all. I'd like to start thanking the Council of the Americas for the invitation of being here today and for discuss such an important theme as energetic transition. And I am so happy to have with me here a person who will answer all my questions, Secretary Tiago Barral. I am a reporter of the Ministry of Income and Revenue. It's been 20 years I've been covering the Ministry of Revenue and Tax, and this is the first time I've been seeking sources within the Ministry of Income in order to speak about environment, sustainability, because every time that we seek someone in government and we ask them who is leading this, it's always the Ministry of Income and Revenue. And so when we seek the Ministry of Revenue, we see that there's all this transversality between All the ministries are involved in this issue, which shows us that the commitment is there and the intention of Brazil in advancing on this agenda. Within the new growth acceleration program, which is a green acceleration program, from the 2 trillion reais in investment, 540 billion reais will be allocated to energy transition. So this is not, we know this is not an easy theme. It's not easy to do energy transition. Our world still depends on fossil fuels, and doing transition requires a lot of money and time, which is something we do not have. So I would like to start asking Secretariat how the country is preparing itself to become the major motor of energy transition, as Lula mentioned during the Amazon Summit. Thank you very much. Good morning, Marta. Good morning to you all. Thank you to the Council of the America for its invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. I'd like to bring a bit of the perspective of Mines and Energy Ministry. Secretary Adalberto was speaking a little bit about the moment of mobilizing the federal government around this agenda. And this is very interesting to see, because today we have an interlocution and the theme regarding ecological transition, energy transition, also with the Ministry of Trade and Development and Ministry of Environment. And this is the core ministry. And this Ministry of Environment is also connected to the National Development Bank. So this interlocution, this dialogue is very present within the spectrum of the public policy agenda of the country. And therefore, this is a great opportunity, but it's also a great challenge of coordinating these agendas and integrating them. So I would say that of all the activities, the one that has taken most of my agenda is this effort in articulating dialogue. You mentioned the Growth Acceleration Program, the PAC, which is working specifically on transition and energy security. We have a new industrial policy in construction, which has one of its major missions is decarbonization and transition towards a green economy. We also have work regarding climate governance to prepare mitigation plans, sectorial mitigation plans. And so there's a whole lot of activities going on. And in the Ministry of Mines and Energy, what we're doing is organizing this program agenda of all the initiatives, integrating a policy of energy transition in order to ease and give our contribution to ease the connection between these initiatives that have energy transition as the core elements of economical policy, industrial policy. So all this has been core to our work. We also know Brazil has its characteristics, and things did not only occur due to the graveness of the situation, but we have been building a tradition in terms of producing renewable energy. Brazil is nowadays one of the key players in electric energy and renewable energy, other than nuclear energy, and this is a very important differential. And all the matrix of fuels, we have been reaching nearly 50% of participation of renewable sources, which makes Brazil occupy a special place with regard to the rest of the world. And so the major challenge that we face here is in terms of consumption of energy per capita. We produce half of what China does and a fifth of what the United States has. So our challenge is to amplify the offering of energy to supply and foster development, and also amplify this participation of green energy. So this is what we've been focusing on in our agenda. As you amplify clean energy matrix, we see how the acceleration program, part of public investments also depend on private investments. So how to attract private investment to Brazil? What does the government intend to offer to private companies? to incentivize them to invest in the country. You are right, Martha. Energy transition and energy security in the acceleration program is centered on private investments. There are a few points that involve publicly oriented resources, so private resources which are within managed by and guided towards public policies. For example, the ProCell, the Program of Energy Conservation, ProCell, which is guided towards private funds dedicated to public initiatives and public programs. But most of the initiatives in the process are private oriented. There's also an important parcel of these investments that come from Petrobras that have a very important participation in the Growth Acceleration Program, the PAC. And so it's a private-public partnership. So the first step is to offer legal framework and regulatory framework which are consistent in nature, that will embrace these opportunities of new business models and new technologies. And for this, we have an agenda of perfectioning legal framework, hydrogen of low carbon, and we're working on a law bill on this, and the fossil fuel of the future, working on zero carbon emissions. Working on the electric sector is of utmost importance, and so it's a very important agenda of legal frameworks which will provide legal security, clear mandates for regularization. This is fundamental. Concerning the contracts, Brazil has been consolidating throughout the years this tradition, and Minister Alexandre Silveira has been speaking a lot about. Of course, there are additional elements that we have been working on. For example, the industrial policies on allocating resources to research and innovation. So, retaking projects like FMDCT, which are programs regarding innovation into hydrogen of low carbon emissions and renewable energies in the Amazon. And therefore, these are an ensemble of elements that we need to make more feasible. Legal security, predictability in this environment, as well as reducing the costs, capital costs for these investments. These are fundamental factors to promote private investments. And we have additional issues that we are working with, for example, with the Ministry of Income and Revenue, concerning fiscal structures, and in order to reduce the costs of these investments in comparing with markets that compete with Brazil for these investments. And so these are the core elements that we've been working with. Regarding the legal frameworks, there are many initiatives. There's a legal framework of green hydrogen, of the carbon credits as well, that has been forwarded to the Congress. Can you manage to give us a list of priorities for the third quarter? What is the order? Because it's a very large amount of projects and proposals that need to advance and depend on the support of the Congress. Yes, as a matter of fact, it's a very favorable moment we're going through. In the first quarter, the policy for the government was very centered on fiscal reform, of the economical agenda, which is more specific and macroeconomics. Now the Congress is, and this has already been mentioned in a very clear way, now we've been motivated to contribute to the structuring and to advance with the agenda of energy policy and energy transition. And so, on one hand, we have this effort of structuring on the federal government level, and it's very positive that the Congress is positive and receptive to this dialogue. We have been participating in the Commission of Mines and Energy and commissions which are discussing hydrogen initiatives and green hydrogen. So there has been a very positive and big space for discussing this agenda. So we will have a series of agendas which will be treated. The government will define its political strategy, which will involve many ministries and many transversal agendas. We also have another agenda which is quite advanced on the realm of the government and of the carbon market, and we're managing to reach consensus on that in a very clear manner and publicly speaking. And also the program called Fuel of the Future, which will treat on the insertion of green fuels, green diesel, which is the vector of decarbonization of transportation, and the carbon issues, which is these are elements which are contemplated in this bill, and there's a very large consensus within the federal government concerning this agenda. And I would also say that we have an opportunity here to advance rapidly with the law project, which is working with offshore wind power. So these are the three first ones. Also, we are opening a discussion within the federal government for a law bill on carbon and net zero carbon and carbon credits. And so, in order to create an action plan of hydrogen for tomorrow and after a long period of work. So these are a few of the agendas. I also think it's important to mention the electric sector, which has many issues of the legal framework that needs to be perfectioned. And just to illustrate the importance of this, Martha, today electricity responds to little less than 20% of final consumption of energy in the country. And all the transition scenarios, energy transition scenarios, this participation will be growing. So a progressive electrification of our economy, of green electricity. And so this participation in electricity, we believe it will overcome the 40% mark. And so using the electric sector as a vector of accelerating energetic transition, and for this to happen, we need to perfection the climate and diminish distortions in this electric sector. I imagine that this is why within the acceleration program we have many issues concerning the transmission lines, and what can this accelerate the green transition process. Within the PAC we have about 60 billion in transition, and in the next 10 years we see that this can overcome 150 billion, and each real invested will give a rate of return of 3 times bigger, especially in the northeastern region. And so the importance of these investments in transition, it's exceptional. First of all, because due to an issue of energy security, renewable energies are essential sources to reassure security of supplies, sustaining the growth of offer and demand in Brazil. And this infrastructure of transmission will allow us increasingly to use in order to extract the best complementarity and the transition and connection between different sources: biomass, natural gas, solar power, wind power. And so the infrastructure of transmission is fundamental in order to guarantee flexibility in the management of the system, which is increasingly more variable within this transition. So transition is crucial elements of this transition strategy.
So what I believe that is crucial is for private market carbon, the creation of this carbon market that is private, and what was explained by the Minister of Finance. We have also to limit the emissions of big polluters nowadays that are big companies. We don't have the number yet. I believe if I'm mistaken, please do correct me. And now I ask you, what is and how fast are we going to be able to have such a market like this one here? Because there is a voluntary already The regulated doesn't exist yet. So, and if you think that sectors such as cement and steel making, they're going to have obstacles in Congress because they are sectors that are more specifically regulated. Well, you mentioned it really well. The regulation nowadays is centered in the implementation of a regulated market of carbon, and that is an important element for the placement of Brazil in the international market in the middle and long term. It's important also for us to give signals so that we are going to guide the investment in infrastructure. And these are investments that have to mature for a long time. So this economic science for the allocation of these resources in these investments is a very important one. The carbon regulated market, it gives us this direction, this sense that enables the companies to have business plans to look at the long term in their business plans. And I think that Brazil has a lot of opportunities so that for the segments that are more connected to the carbon footprint, not only in Brazil but also in the rest of the world, we'll be able to position these segments that are more carbon intensive, that have to work harder in a condition that it is very competitive in comparison to the rest of the world and in a more interesting position. We'll be able to decarbonize steel making and with natural gas, with hydrogen, with vegetable coal or mineral coal actually, and with biomethane. And that is, Brazil has a very big diversity of resources that allows these companies to develop strategies that are going to vary a lot according to the local vocation and their placement in the international carbon. And that's the logic of the regulated market. And to create this support that will enable Brazil to monetize these comparative advantages, and especially to attract investments. We were talking about the National Hydrogen Program. It is focused on, and it has three specific aspirational targets, one for 25, 2030, and the other 2035. And the one for 35 is to consolidate hydrogen hubs. And what are these? They are the opportunities to produce hydrogen, but also to use it as an input to add other values that have low carbon emission, fertilizers as well, using the competitiveness of clean energy here that we have in Brazil. So we consider this opportunity, and I believe that this carbon market has this foundation, this institutional foundation, and the credibility of the carbon footprint and the capacity that Brazil has to deliver on this decarbonization, and it is credible, and it provides this opportunity to the market. Just finalizing my thinking, the regulation of the bill is not going to constrain the segments that are going to be involved over time, and it does not establish the targets in the law. There is a governance that is specific for this. There are institutions that are going to build these targets, and that is a consensus building process that is going to happen based on this institutionality and the legal framework that we're trying to pass. Does the government have an idea about the potential of what this might be in terms of GDP increase or job generation with a regulated market? Well, I don't really know the specific numbers about this modeling of the regulated carbon market, but we do know that some consultancies have provided some estimates, and lately there was a study that was carried out for the scenarios and for carbon neutrality all the way to 2050 that was made between the partnership of IDB, EPE, and SEBI that make us, enable us to envisage this future. But the fact that we see now is that we have opportunities for forest carbon, and also in the energy sectors, we have multi-billionaire opportunities. In order to give you an idea, within the scope of our national energy transitional plan, we have mapped investments in the amount of 2 trillion reais that could be encompassed in the scope of energy transition. But how long is it going to take? This is going to take around, we're planning for the next 15 years. Around, this is the timeline, 15 years. Okay, Secretary, and now playing the reverse role. More than half than PAC investments, we're talking about a clean energy matrix, but more than half of this are in the sector located in the gas and oil sector. Isn't this something contrary or contradictive? No, I don't see contradiction in this aspect, because here in Brazil, this is an opportunity that we have. Brazil is one of the countries that has the most relevance in clean energy sector, and at the same time it has an oil and gas industry that is very relevant. At the same time, it has contributed to the funding of energy transition. We can see the investments of oil and gas industries in the investments of biohydrogen, biomethane, ethanol of second generation. There is a series of technologies that have received this funding, and this is a factor for this acceleration of the energy transition in the country. The fact is that 80% of the energy that is consumed around the world comes from fossil fuels. And if you really want to make this energy transition, it's no use just stop producing oil or extracting oil. If we do that, the energy transition won't happen just because we stopped extracting oil. And there is the risk of inflation in the energy and huge social impacts that are going to be harmful. So we need to speed up the building of infrastructure and the clean energy offer that will enable us to make the demand to go to these other sources. And in this respect, we'll be able to reduce the dependence on other oil and gas resources. So we have to try and accelerate the use of alternatives to fossil fuels so that we can reduce the offer of oil and gas without threatening the energy security. That is a challenge, and it's a process that is not a simple one. We're talking about speeding up the granting of licenses of transmission lines of production of low carbon fuels and energy generation. These are processes that we're going to have to build consensus within society so that we can create the conditions for this transition to happen. And the fact is, and that is concrete data, is that 80% of the world nowadays depends on fossil fuels to have energy. How do you get out of this? Creating alternatives, not just stopping to produce and to extract oil and gas, or else there will be a mismatch between offer and demand, because we have to consider the social impact, and that is the balance that we want to reach in order to do so. You are really highlighting the risk of an energy inflation, right? And the need that we have to make this transition at a paced way. Okay, but I do have to ask, one of the hot topics during the Amazon summit was the exploration of oil in the equatorial area. We cannot stop producing this, but shouldn't we avoid doing this so we can start making the energy transition? And my comment is not in the sense that the transition will be a slow one. I do advocate for a speedy transition, and that's why that we are doubling the efforts in the generation for the generation of more energy sources, and the program Combustível do Futuro, or Future Fuel in English, and that we are implementing this, and that's why Civil Civil defended or advocated the strengthening of the program RenovaBio. That's why we're expanding the national program of hydrogen to create the conditions so we are not held hostage of oil and gas, the production of oil and gas in the long term. But what I'm saying here is that we need to be careful so this process is synced, so that the phase down of the oil and gas will be followed with the new alternatives going into the market, entering the market, and we want to fund and to implement all of these infrastructures so that we can achieve our NDC and the neutrality of carbon. And we know that the neutrality of carbon, and especially to anticipate this, and especially so that other countries can invest, and so the Brazilian society will not pay a too high bill in this sense. I was there in Belém moderating one of the Amazon dialogues with the presence of Minister Luciana. It was a very enriching debate about the dynamic of the energy transition, especially concerning oil, but also, even more than oil, the mining transition. There is a concern in terms of how mining is going to impact the traditional communities and the ecosystems, and I think it is a very big challenge, and especially the equatorial border, which is a very big area of the country. This discussion has to be made in a transparent manner, listening to different perspectives, and building ways in order to achieve consensus to what's going to be better for the country. This is an agenda not only for the oil and gas industry, it concerns a lot of other areas, and that's why President Lula has been trying to create an environment within the federal government so we can build this consensus and find these new paths of around what we are going to do with these reserves, with these potential reserves. So, at the moment, the discussion is centered in raising the potential, okay? There is no decision regarding this, especially the large-scale production and the research. It's the same challenge that we face in mineral research. The National Energy Agency points that the lithium mining is going to be amplified 40 times just lithium, and if we think about cobalt, 25 times the size that we have now. So we do have to discuss about also, Brazil knows very little its mineral resources, and in terms of mineral energy or resources, we have a huge challenge to overcome so we can achieve this target. So the Ministry of Mines and Energy has been trying to establish partnerships in this regard. And of course, that brings elements so that society can make decisions concerning in what areas we're going to effectively invest in this mineral production and what is most strategic for the production of the country. They are not easy challenges. Naturally, the energy transition is going into a phase that we're going to have more and more the need to carry out these strategic debates that are very delicate also. On the global aspect of energy transition, we have a challenge of climate energies, climate transitions, and the development of our economy. And we also have the challenges related to how this global dynamic will affect our local economy in the Amazon, in the Brazilian savanna, the Cerrado, and in big cities as well. And I think there is no easy way to do that. That is the main challenge for us to overcome. Thank you very much. I said that we ran out of time now, okay? Thank you very much for your presence here, and the agenda will continue. Thank you.
Nós queremos agradecer.
We'd like to thank the National Secretary, Thiago Barral, that was present here with us, and the reporter from Bloomberg, Marta Viertebek, that performed this interview on the topic of energy and the energy transition. Ladies and gentlemen, before we invite the next guest, we'd like to thank the sponsors of our pan-regional sponsor, Amazon AWS, Amazon Web Services, our corporate sponsors, Kellogg's Brazil, Chevron Corporation, and C Group of Shopee, besides the Bloomberg Partnership and the F-Suite. And ladies and gentlemen, we'd like now continuing with our agenda, we ask to the stage the Minister of Justice and the Public Security, Minister Flávio Diner, and the Senior Director of the Council of America, Cecilia Tornaghi. With the minister, there is no unfair thing. I'm Cecilia Tornaghi with the Councils of Americas, and it's a privilege to have a minister here live, because the last time I was with them, it was during the pandemic, and we were just little screens on a Zoom screen. So it's a very big pleasure to have you here. Thank you very much for being here. And this panel and this conference, when we were talking about a sustainable future, especially a sustainable future in Brazil, I thought about people asking, what does justice have to do with that? And I think that justice has everything to do with that. Why? Because without legal certainty, without stability to promote sustainable and inclusive development, neither of them will be able to be possible. We see daily examples in places where the issue of security here in Brazil, where it's a very delicate subject and sometimes it's out of control. Well, I'd like to talk about some topics, and I'd like to start with this one here, because Amazon has been mentioned here many times today, and in your words that I heard in the side meeting that happened during the summit of the Amazon Summit with the international police forces or enforcement agencies. You say that there will be no protection if there are public and private investments, and this will only take place if there are institutional conditions, and security is one of the main aspects in this part. And this is a challenge, but it's also an opportunity. I'd like to talk to you today about the work that the Ministry of Justice and the work in the territory, in Brazilian territory, because 60% of our country is located in the Amazon biome, but nowadays we have a parallel power that has worked together with the criminals and with illegal loggings and illegal mining elements. So I'd like to talk to you about this. Can you talk about the initiatives? I know that there is an initiative on new centers of the federal police in Manaus, especially an international one. Can you talk about this plan of the repossession of the national land in this area, and what are the plans of the federal government? I'd like to greet and salute everyone here present, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to greet Cecilia, Susan, and its invitation here. The Ministry of Justice and Public Security is now in its 203rd anniversary. And when it was created, it was a ministry that dealt with constitutional provisions so that society would work. So it was a guarantor of the rules of the game. It was a Ministry of the Interior. That's why it is in Esplanade along with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Itamaraty. So Ministry of the Itamaraty, Foreign Affairs, and Ministry of Justice of Ministry of the Interior. Definitely the Amazon is a topic that is a domestic one due to its size, due to the strategic role of guarantor of Brazil as climate protector, and also considering the fact that there is not just one Amazon. We're talking about multiple Amazons. The eastern Amazon is one situation, the western one is different, the rural Amazon is one thing, the urban Amazon is another one. So we have to adapt our vision or our perspective to this reality, represented by the fact that the Amazon is not just the forest or the rainforest. There are 25 million people living in the Amazon. So our concern today, Cecilia, is to guarantee public security and legal security. In order to guarantee legal security, we won't have sustainability without a very powerful cycle of private and public investments. What we saw in the past few decades, especially in the most recent years, the strengthening of the criminal organizations here in Brazil, especially in the Amazon region. The three past events of rebellions in the incarceration system were in the Amazon, Acre, and Amapá. The three states are in the Amazon. So, when we established this diagnosis, we created a plan that is called Safer Amazon, which presumes the occupation of the territory with actions of control and order and fighting this parallel power that Cecilia talked about. What is the plan Amazon Safer Amazon? O Amazônia Mais Segura in Portuguese. It's a 2 billion reais project funded by the National Secretary Fund, National Security Fund, and also the Amazon Fund, with specific targets to establish two centers of command in Manaus, an international center by the Federal Police, incorporating the Amazon and the countries that border Brazil, a center of the National Force in Manaus, an environmental battalion, and the states that have the Amazon, and 34 integrated bases that are integrated with the state police forces, 26 land-based, and the rest in river-based. And with that, we'll be able to have conditions to fight and to face these attempts of the hijacking the security in these areas and by illicit forces, and at the same time the reduction of deforestation, and at the same time provide legal certainty. That is being implemented now. We've already established partnership with the neighboring countries and the Belém Summit, and well, we're very optimistic that now we're going to have a more robust presence of the law enforcement agencies, and as a consequence, not only to Brazil, but as a consequence to Brazil. You also mentioned in other occasions that it's not just a matter of law enforcement, it's a more general matter. And I'd like to mention the numbers or the figures by the World Bank that the forest standing would be worth $317 billion a year for the country, 1.3 trillion reais in economic terms. That is, the deforestation is basically destruction of wealth. However, the destruction of wealth in Brazil, for example, let's consider the illicit entrepreneur or the illegal entrepreneur. They have a lot of profits with the drug trafficking and legal timber trade. So these are possibilities that are in the forest. And what are the options? And how is the Ministry of Justice working in partnership with the other ministries? Is there a cross-cutting aspect to that in this work within the Amazon? Not only to offer the law enforcement agencies and work, but also to fight these figures to 317 billion reais to Brazil or to the other illegal organizations. The fundamental issue is to provide conditions for these people to access revenues that are legal. I give you an example here of the Yanomami territory in Roraima. What happens there? There is a huge occupation that was the past few years, the dark years, and an occupation with the permission of political segments and economic segments that that led 12 to 15,000 people to occupy that territory. It's including people that included two criminal organizations in the country. And there was a mass recruitment, Cecilia, because there was an estimate that an illegal miner would make around 3,000 reais a month, which is around $600 a month. And if these citizens had a perspective in the work and as an employment, and there was an offer that from Bolsa Familia, the benefits of Bolsa Familia, this person would go from 3,000 reais to 600 reais, meaning, of course, you need economic stimuli or benefits so that we can achieve legal mining. So the legal mining has a lot of resilience because they articulate with the local needs. They meet these local needs. Of course, there is transversality or cross-cutting with Minister Marina PCDAN, that is a plan that coordinates all of the activities. And in the Ministry of Justice and Public Security, we have to organize the federal police and to articulate with the public policies with the states. And so that all of these different types of Amazons will find activities that will consider the standing forest and all the way to bioeconomy and economic and sustainable activities as a viable way to generate income. So that is the perspective of the government and of the president, and we're working together in this concern. And naturally, there are initiatives with private partners and companies that are essential so that we can make this a reality. And naturally, the implementation of the PCA, which is the market that will provide payments for ecosystem services. If you look from an aerial picture of the Amazon, you'll see the western border of the Amazon, which is largely preserved in the state of Amazonas, but not only this in this state, and the southern Amazon, and the southern border of the Amazon and the eastern Amazon, a rate of deforestation that is much higher. And in this certain part, when you look for it, you can see these green spots. What are these green spots? They're indigenous lands. The indigenous lands, the indigenous communities are the biggest protectors and guarantors of this vegetation. And that's, you just have to look at the satellite pictures. That's why we started to delimit another lands, because it just fulfills not only the provision 231 in the federal constitution, but also the article 225 in terms of the preservation of the environment.
Yeah, exactly. I wanted to touch on this point because there are agrarian disputes due to demarcation issues, and there's a diversity of indigenous peoples and traditions in the region. We have many Quilombola territories and originary people territories and indigenous as well. So it's a very big diversity that comes into place. So when we have the police operating in this region, there is a concern and specific work to be done. They need to be priorly trained on how to deal with this cultural diversity. And for example, we saw this in the state of Espírito Santo when they go to another region of the country where we have a completely different culture. These differences need to be taken into account. And so it's not just an issue of dispute, of agrarian dispute, but yes, also an issue of tradition of people which are increasing and wanting respect. Yes, we actually reactivated a national program of security and citizenship, and it has a very strong part working on police training focused on different themes, for example, cyber crimes, how to work with different cultural contexts, and environmental crimes like illegal mining, logging, etc. So we have a lot of pesticide problems with pesticides, and so there is an ensemble of crimes that articulate themselves among the environmental crimes. And so we are focused, and our concern is with proportionality. When we deal with issues concerning security, normally sometimes part of society has this simplistic thought that the argument, thinking that the right wing will defend more police and the left wing is against the police. And this is obviously, that goes way before the understanding of what this is. And so we have to include indigenous lands, and due to the invasions that occurred and proliferated in the last years. So what did we do? We sought reconciliation, especially. Now, of course, there is the use of progressive use of police powers when necessary. And so there are situations in which our teams and the teams of states and the federal police have to work with coercive power of the state until the maximum degree, which you know what it is. But it's not the desirable path. Of course, the desirable path is through dialogue, and this is what we recently did, an operation recently in the state of Pará, taking more than 1,000 people from indigenous lands, and thank God there was no type of confrontation, no deaths, and so thanks to the negotiating capacities of the police of that state. You mentioned the cyber issue, and I'd like to speak about this, but just another point to touch about this region of the north of the country, that these operations are all transnational operations. There are no boundaries and borders and illegal operations. So how is this relationship with neighboring countries? We are activating AmeriPol, which is a system of cooperation with which Brazil didn't prioritize in the last 4 years. So we are reinvigorating and reactivating a connection with the General Secretary of AmeriPol, and to become the General President as well of the Brazilian police forces. And thanks to this cooperation, reactivating cooperation with the Amazon countries in Manaus, and we will organize a meeting and invite the polices from the neighboring countries so that we can manage to deal with these transnationality issues. For example, the Yanomamis in Roraima, on the north of the country. Part of illegal mining is in the other country, in our neighboring country. And so they just come back and forth, because obviously there are no juridical borders to these criminal factions. And so it's a very challenging issue of international police through AmeriPol, through Interpol as well. And thanks to this new partnership that we're building with the countries of the Amazon region and agreements with the police forces of the Amazon countries, they all participated actually in this meeting that occurred recently. And I believe that next year we'll be managing to have this meeting in the city of Manaus, so that physical, practical security is of key importance. So in order to foster innovation and make the forest become feasible and possible sustainable development. And even for agribusiness today, and companies of fertilizers and pesticides have noticed this and realized this, and they have been suffering with the proliferation of these crimes, because, as I said, there is smuggling of these products in the part of the Brazilian borders. And so this is of the interest of everybody. And so when there was a double homicide of Phillips and Bruno Pereira, there was a void when we occupied the territory with the river base of the federal police in the city of Atalaia do Norte, which is a bordering city where this crime occurred. Things improved, of course. Satellite monitoring is important. We have a very good system of satellite monitoring, and the armed forces also have satellite and monitoring, and the National Institute of Statistics and Research, and space investigation. And so the physical presence of the police forces is key to revert the tendencies of crime in the Brazilian Amazon. Just remind you that you manage the agro business at Amazon and which supplies the free irrigation for South America. Let's speak about cyber issues now. There are two sides. There's a lot of discussions concerning the regulation of digital platforms, and it's a passionate discussion not only in the private sector but also in the public sector. And we have evidence of the impact and repercussion of misinformation, not only institutional political scenario, but also the impact on competition in space. And we see that digital platforms are becoming increasingly business platforms. And so how do you see this regulation? What do you expect? And where would you like the country to reach in terms of regulating these platforms? It's an international debate, and it's not just doesn't only rise passions in Brazil, but also in the European Union, and it's relatively new debate, which is in process of being aligned, not only in Brazil. And what we expect to reach is to increase power and juridical framework for this. If we were here 50 years ago, the most expressive and powerful companies with the biggest, they would be fuel-based, and so there's a need of having symmetry. And so all things occur according to the social necessity. So as the power is increased and the decision-making capacity and business flows to decide investments, policies, and decide cultures, consumer habits, of course that if we have, it's fundamental to have stronger regulations. And this is why it's important to create this and to foster this. And what defines good and bad in a society? It's regulation. And no sphere, human sphere, is deregulated or unregulated. Even the most sacred space of intimacy, which is the household, a marriage, it is always a relation where we have three people, the couple and the juridical ordering framework. And so there is nothing that stifles or hinders this, that to foster weak regulation, like something which is absolute and unchangeable. And this is what we are seeking to change. How? Going through different paths, and like any objective, high dimension objective, we do not only have a sole path. Of course, that the classic path in the Western democracies, of course, we have the Congress, and we are reinterpreting the civil framework of the Internet Code, and we have Article 19 of the Civil Article and Article 21 with different signals. So maybe the signals that are Article 21 of non-consent and explicit sexual activity on the Internet might be a way of giving adequate consent to Article 19, which intends to ensure freedom of speech and freedom of expression. And so we do this in a very careful manner. And today, the debate with the platforms is way better than it was 6 months ago. And I think this is thanks to the fact that we conquered speaking and debating about it and tackling certain criticisms, like being appointed like being a dictator or a repressor. So we have to be necessary issues. If they're killing children in schools, like it was happening a while back, there's childhood pornography. Federal police did an operation in Santa Catarina where there was a brother taking sexually advantage of his sister, a 7-year-old sister, and putting her images in the Internet. So the issue regarding this theme in contemporary democracies is of fundamental importance. So there's an administrative issues that need to be addressed, and we have been having meetings in all platforms to find agreements. And there will be an event which would occur with these platforms. And so there's the issue regarding proportionality. So the concept of having a strong regulation, how do you reach these strong regulations? Negotiating with administrative powers, with legal powers, judiciary powers, and I hope that we'll also reach legislative and elaboration of a new law. The challenge of regulate an industry which is in full development and extension from 2014 to now, we could be in the last century. It seems like we were the last century. So what are the challenges? And how to deal with these challenges that this industry will continue innovating. And thank God, I hope that we will continue innovating. And this have synchronous issues occurring and regulation. So regulation always is a bit behind concerning the crimes and economic activities, but regulations are advancing, and we already have a debate going on in the Congress about artificial intelligence, which has a humongous impact on human relations, generally speaking, even from in affectionate relationships, marital relationships, but also professional relationships. So of course, we need to take care of what is going on now. We have to be careful with the dark web and what happens in these platforms, and at the same time we need to look ahead in order to shape this in a careful manner and adequating this to this extraordinary technological advancement. We do not intend to deactivate the internet like it happened in the 18th century. It was inadequate, for example, to break machinery in order to stop human exploitation in industrial revolution. So the fourth cycle of the scientific and technological revolution, this will not be resolved simply stopping what is happening, but simply doing what all the societies did, in other words, seeking this interface between creativity, talent, and innovation and regulation, which protects society from eventual misuses of private powers, which are derivative of this technological innovation. So other than the platforms, we also have the issues concerning cyber security, which touch upon all public services and businesses. It's very difficult to operate without having a digital component. And I brought to you today, this was my last the last paper I wrote on the cybernetic attack in Costa Rica that stopped the country. And one of the interesting points about this is that within Latin America, Costa Rica is the most prepared to tackle cybercrime, but it's very far from the rest of the world. But they are leaders in attacks and cyber attacks and invasions. And so today we have a structure based on GSI. So I'd like to know what is the view of the Ministry of Justice and how to tackle this issue, which is just the beginning. It's just a platform, more, is it another platform for crime? And someone I spoke to is a criminal mentality, whatever the platform we're dealing with, and with remote work and online work and virtual work, we have to be very careful with cyber attacks, not only within companies and government, but also in people's private lives. So I'd like to know what are the initiatives which are necessary in order to make this cyber protection more robust. The first one is the GSI, which is fundamental, because it's up to the GSI, which is the Cabinet of Institutional Security, to take care of these critical structures, where we take care of these platforms. And from the federal police, we created a Secretariat of Cybercrime. We have a sector, a department of the police, of the federal police, which is dedicated to cybercrimes. And this sector works on bank frauds and sexual exploitation of children and teenagers and other attacks which occurred, and there is a wave of attacks going on against women in politics. So there's an attempt of excluding these women, and I have received many complaints which are being analyzed. And third of all, we are working on strengthening partnership with different states of the Federation. Everybody close to the mall here in Brasília, we have a unit that monitors all different states. This is our lab on cybercrime. So we have all this infrastructure in place which integrates state in order for us to manage to foster good communication and smooth communication amongst all the police offices throughout the country, throughout in different states and municipalities. And last week, thanks to the vice presidents of Geraldo Alckmin, in a meeting we defined two themes as being fundamental for ENCLA, which encompasses 30 institutions of the three powers. So environmental crimes was the first one, financing of greenwashing and all types of working also with new technology. These are the two main axes of the work of ENCLA for this year and 2024. Whether the crime is cyber crime or physical crime, it has to be laundered somewhere. And so this is another issue that has no borders whatsoever. Just remembering you that when there's laundering, money laundering ends up distorting free competition. And so performance and the possibility of developing businesses, it's all affected by money laundering. Is there a direct collaboration on an international level? Brazil is inserted within this international discussion. Yes, in this moment we have a delegation of the Federal Police of the Ministry of Justice in New York dealing with the negotiation of a convention on cybercrimes of the UN. We have two directors, one of the Ministry of Justice and one of the Federal Police, and we have been participating of these forums, and Lula has been speaking about this theme in the forums of which he participated, and we have also been dialoguing with platforms, the ones that have office in Brazil and other ones which still not have office in Brazil. So working in a transversal manner is fundamental. And before closing this table, another issue I thought was very interesting was the program of the Ministry of Justice to renegotiate debt. And interesting that it came from in parallel of another program of the Ministry of Income and Revenue, because it seems to me that when the consumer is healthy financially, this is like sine qua non for the growth of any economy. So I'd like to know what was the result of this campaign, and how is the integration of this agreement, this joint work in areas which are so close between the two ministries. One of the strategical assets is its internal markets. It's a triumph that Brazil possesses, and this is why we have to take care of this strategical asset. And this is the premise with which we work with a two complementary program. And our program is also subscribed by Minister Haddad. So we trailed two paths. One initially to negotiate debt between government and FEBRA-BAN, and it has excellent performance. And we also launched this other initiative guided towards the integration of the national system of consumer concerning debt with companies that render services, commerce in generally speaking. So we integrated the network of consumer protection rights, and there was a decree of President Lula subscribed by the Minister of Work and Employment, and so we reactivated that with very positive results, and we are consolidating this with the offices of consumer protection of the country, and where consumers who had the conditions of coming back to the consumer market and recovering power of purchase, and so increasing and making things move. So this is very positive, and we'll have a new phase of this government project to take people out of debt. so that we will have, we believe that this will incentivize people to consume with more awareness, become more aware consumers, but also fostering partnerships and fostering agreements and to leverage economy. Thank you very much, Minister. Thank you very much. Just a last comment before we close up here and wrap up. How do you see the theme on inclusion, sustainable growth, and inclusion? We have in Brazil coming back to international leadership, and Brazil coming back to the place of main players, going through bigger pressure environmentally speaking. So the image of Brazil is changing, and internally as well, we still have many issues to tackle, a lot of instability, the fact that the country is polarized. So how do you see this moving forward within the domestic scenario, and what are your expectations into the end of the first year of the third mandate?
One of the objectives part is something that influences the economy. So it says that subjectivities are decisive to prospect the future. So that's basically the invitation that I want to give, because there are the self-fulfilling prophecies that can happen. Of course, if there is skepticism, this is going to be a major roadblock for the government. And through the PACI, we're trying to get more public-private partnerships. These are agreements and pacts that we're proposing, and naturally society at large and private companies are players that will be really important in this. And I do work with a lot of faith, religious faith, and analytical acumen, because the situation nowadays is better than in the first one on January the 1st or in the 8th of January. Of course, it was up to me, due to the fact that I'm the Minister of Justice, to dabble in certain topics that are not so comfortable or so pleasant, but there is a legal duty to do that. So we need the law to be fulfilled. We need the people who committed crimes to face penalties, and this is an aspect of social life. And someone asked me, what is the focus of the Ministry of Justice and Public Security? We continue to zeal for the rules of the game, because we understand that on an avenue, people can go on the left or on the right, but everyone has to meet, has to follow, or to abide by the same traffic law, because if they don't do so, it becomes untenable, the situation between the relation between people. So we're looking to go to this sphere, which is an institutional policy, a goal which is to recover the concepts of legal security and predictability by punishing people that committed crimes in the past, and to build a future for according to these new pacts. And besides my religious faith, I have an analytical optimism in many aspects, especially in the vision characteristic. I suffer a lot from it, because there are some private attitudes and private spheres of my personal life that became very complicated, from celebrating the birthday of a child, from going to the movies, because the political division creates this the aggressiveness towards people. But I believe that this is winding down a little bit, even though I can see people that love me or hate me, but that's part of life. Wherever I go, I see people that love me and people that hate me, right? So that is the result of this environment of political extremism that was prevalent here in Brazil. But I think that the political surveys or polls are showing that these divisions are slowing, are reducing, and that is a good premise for society, to have the rate of cohesion to be higher than the rate of dissolution. So this cohesion that is getting stronger is going to be good, and I believe that everybody will be able to dress the national jersey, and everybody will be happy. Thank you very much, Minister Flávio Dino. Thank you so much for your presence.
Senhoras e senhores,
Ladies and gentlemen, now I'd like to thank the presence of Minister of Justice and Public Security, Minister Flávio Dino, and Ms. Cecilia Tornaghi, Senior Director of the Council of the Americas. We're getting close to the end of the ceremony, but we'll still have one last speech of the President of the Senate that is among us. Now we would like to invite you and to thank the pan-regional sponsor, the Amazon Web Series, and our corporate sponsors, Chevron, Kellogg's, and the C Group, Shopee, and the partnership between Bloomberg, Linea, and the F-Suite. So now we have the pleasure to invite our last speaker for the end of the ceremony. We ask to take the stage the President of the Brazilian Federal Senate, Mr. Rodrigo Pacheco. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to salute very especially our President and CEO, Susan Siegel, that welcomes us here in this morning. I'd like to salute and greet you for this event that focuses on sustainable development of Brazil. I do confess that I had prepared a speech that was going to read, but after seeing our Ministry of Justice speaking without reading a speech, I'm going to improvise too, of course, within a reasoning that it will be useful for our interaction, conveying a little of what the feeling is, and in relation to the moment we're living now in Brazil, and performing a current analysis on the recent past that we have in our country that is very important for the future projection for everything that is defined as a priority. We have to understand the past and also to make a diagnosis of what was done and how we can work with the perspectives from Brazil in the future. And the diagnosis of a recent past of Brazil and for the past 10 years in our country, it's if we had on one side very turbulent moments and very difficult ones, on the other side in National Congress we had many important achievements. And when I say turbulent, it's because it's precisely 10 years ago in 2013 when people in Brazil, especially the young people, went to the streets to complain against the increase in bus tariff or bus fares, and especially an amendment to the communication proposal that would limit the Federal Prosecution Service to fight against crime. There was a dissatisfaction environment with the political environment and with the authorities in general. And after that, we had a renewal of political movement in 2014, which was in a situation between an election between the Aécio Neves and Dilma Rousseff, and after that in 2016 the second impeachment of this new stage of the Republic after the redemocratization. And the first one was the President Carlos speech impeachment. And at the same time, there was the seizure of the mandate of federal representative of the House of Representatives, and all of the political interference and the interference in the justice from the justice and the Congress, which also made it hard to govern. So right after that, new political scenario, the election of President Jair Bolsonaro, during a moment of pandemic and many difficulties, in a way that even the prison of former presidents of republic revealed a scenario of a lot of insecurity and instability here. That was a string of events that took place and that gave us a lot, that caused a lot of concern to us. And these were not definitely normal years. There was no normalcy back then that could be celebrated in this time. But at the same time that this was happening, we also managed to do this in Brazil. Many different and important things. We carried out a political reform that that conveys an image of Brazil that reduced the number of political parties. That was made 1 year ago, and we established the roof of constitutional expenses. And this roof of expenses, or the debt ceiling, is extremely important so that we can work with this. So we could work with it and within the federal budget. And that time we had the reform in the labor laws, and I was a representative back then. And that reforms, it tried to modernize and provide more freedom in the hiring process, and that was the logic behind the change in the system, in the labor system. And after that, in 2019, an important reform of the Social Security that enabled us to continue with security that out of the Social Security system that was walking towards the doom and insolvency. So these were constitutional measures over this time that that were an expression of a national Congress. And back then, as a representative, and now as a senator by the state of Minas Gerais, a national Congress that was a reformer. And beyond this, there were many other legal frameworks that were created here in Brazil in the infrastructure area, such as the gas framework and energy or electrical energy framework that makes it possible for Brazil to use 85% to have the 85% of our energy matrix coming from renewable energies, wind power, solar power, and water generated, and other areas and also in the financial system, providing the autonomy of the central bank, which was a huge improvement in the country, and also the modernization of the exchange system here in Brazil in terms of foreign investments in the country, and also the modernization and the bankruptcy laws, in the public bidding laws, and the framework of the startups. I could mention here countless bills that were passed, and most of you have followed them, and most intensely some of the bills that show that the National Congress is a very big reformer. And what I've been saying here in this time is that we have a priority, and the priority is the tax reform. And here in 2023, you only had the real possibility of a tax reform because we did the homework of making all of these other reforms, these previous reforms. Had we not done the Social Security reform, we would have been discussing it right this year. And concerning this reform, if there was a reform that makes it hard to reach consensus, there are many conflicting interests in it, is a tax reform. In the other reforms, there was common sense, or there was a common ground to all of them. And in the tax reform, we want to basically simplify it. We want to reduce the red tape and this anarchical system, which is the tax system that has so many conflicting laws and with many different interpretations by the courts and the Federal Revenue Service. So we all agree that we need a model of simplification. We all agree that we need a model of reduction of bureaucracy, and to make it an understandable tax system, which is not the case right now. But when we look at the content and the form and the merit of the tax reform, we can find the divergences. So the Brazilian state doesn't want to collect fewer taxes, and the Brazilian taxpayer doesn't want to increase the percentage of in taxes, and there are also the federative conflicts, states and societies, and a lot of them, they have divergence in terms of performing tax reform, the municipalities, because they will lose autonomy in terms of the ISS or the tax on services, and these many different conflicts, they boil up. And how do we solve them all? First, because we have to we have to reach consensus that we need to reform the system, and if there is no consensus, we will have to vote on it, which is something sacred in the art of voting and the politics. The politician has to choose the best form, and that's the art of choice. An experienced politician in his state. He was the mayor of Manaus. He was the governor of the state of Amazonas, and he was the minister of state. And he has very broad comprehension and knowledge about this federation. And he comes from the northern region in Brazil, where there is a free trade zone of Manaus. And now the concepts of the tax reform, they have to be considered. And it would be better if he were here to talk about the tax reform. And it's up to him now to organize and to coordinate this reform. He has already presented a schedule that has many hearings in the Congressional Committee of Constitutional and deliberation in the plenary in the Federal Senate in 2 votes, and the approval by them. And up to October, the beginning of October, we'll be able to give Brazil a tax reform that will be passed. And evidently, we have our contributions and the studies on the reform. Naturally, we have to identify what it means in terms of a tax burden, and if we are going to effectively to continue with it with the same tax burden, it's important to quantify and to clarify the tax exemptions, and if these exemptions express tax freedom or not. And we have to create a convergence between the tax entities, because a lot of municipalities that are big, they're still resisting the tax reform, and it's very important to solve and to answer all of these questions so that we can have the approval of the reform. As the president of the National Federal Congress, as a Senate, I'm very confident in the approval of the tax reform with the cooperations and the proposals of changes by the Federal Senate, and when they get to the House of Representatives, will definitely be looked into. And the proposal of change in this needs this balance between the Senate and the House of Representatives. So the proposal of amendment to the Constitution, as many times as often as necessary, they have to go from one house or from one chamber to the other until we find a common ground. And I believe in the maturity of these chambers, and especially because we need it. We really need the tax reform. So, notwithstanding the tax reform, we cannot trust the Brazilian economy to the only to the tax reform, meaning it has a transition plan that it takes very long. Now, what the Brazilian state has to deal with are the current problems. We have current problems with the approval of the tax framework that replaces the one that I mentioned before at the beginning of the year, and this tax regime or the fiscal regime that is proposed now, and that was in the Senate and now the House, goes back now to the House with subtle changes that were suggested by the Senate, especially in the constitutional fund of the federal district as an exemption, because in the original proposal, the constitutional fund was not provided for as part of the fiscal element. So the House is going to analyze these changes that were, or alterations that were given by the Senate, and will decide on the new tax regime that and which will need the approval of the president, and that has to do with fiscal reliability or fiscal responsibility. In CAFE, we have another bill that was passed in the House, and it's now in the Senate Committee of Finances. that is going to be voted on the plenary, especially because it is in the procedure of urgency that imposes the approval until the end of August. So we have many different challenges in terms of economic challenges or sustainability, so that this fiscal regime will be effective. So because we need the tax collection is very important, and it's not just this tax collection should not be increased with new taxes. This has to take place with sustainable strategies that will not sacrifice the production in Brazil and the manufacturing in Brazil. We are in a state of alert due to the reduction of tax collection in the past few months. Municipalities have been very worried in the past few months due to this cause, and it's a very good thing that the economic team and the federal government and the congressional team is analyzing this so we can reach a balance in terms of the expenses and the revenues of the government. And we'll only be successful in the federal government if the municipalities are successful as well, because the federal government is basically the sum of the municipalities. And concerning the main topic of this event, I'd like to say that for a country that made so many modifications in the infrastructure, in the education and the health area, of course there are many other changes that are going to be implemented, especially during the pandemic, which was the first parliament that made it possible to vote on urgent bills. In the first parliament in the world doing this, a country that has a vaccination system that is very effective and broad, that has a unified health system that showed its force during this moment of pandemic, that has a healthy electoral system, and that is internationally recognized as an agile and effective system, a country that faced democratic attacks and made democracy and made it possible for democracy to prevail. It's a country also that can make a tax reform, that can have a new fiscal framework, that can provide for the reduction, that can reduce the unemployment, provide housing for people, and that can provide the minimal benefits or minimal revenues for people. And because in order to and we will only achieve we'll only achieve these targets if we prioritize a few topics. I'd like to mention here these priorities. To say first that Brazil cannot be left behind in technological and scientific advances. Brazil has to invest in science and technology. The minister was here to talk about this, but Brazil needs and has investments, needs to make more investments under penalty of being left behind in the scientific and technological advances. Second thing, we need to invest in green economy, and Brazil needs and should and has the possibilities to be a powerhouse when it prioritizes green economy, considering the bioeconomy and the biodiversity that we have, considering a country that prizes for decarbonization, for the reduction of temperature and fighting deforestation, because after all we have to show the world that it's due to the fact that we have 66% of our territory that is with original vegetation. We have clean energy, and we have ethanol, renewable energies, and we have wind and solar power. We have green hydrogen as an asset that we can use so that we can depend less and less on fossil fuels. And we have to do the basics, as Rodrigo Fonseca, that is responsible by Apex in Miami, that established a very good relationship with the U.S. It's very important for us to remember that we have environmental laws in Brazil, and laws that are really good, such as 605, such as the crimes against fauna and flora, and that punishes with penalty of detention people who, or incarceration, people who who commit environmental crimes. Here in Brazil, legal entities can be held accountable in this respect, but we do have a culture of not abiding by the law. And unfortunately, what the deforestation that is we're fighting more and more, especially by this new government that established this as a priority in its agenda, we still have to move forward. We're dealing with clandestine behavior, with criminal behavior, and we have to fight this because this is a special necessity so that the world can see Brazil as a country committed to the environment, so we can ratify their international agreements, so the European Mercosur agreement will be made possible, and the ascension or the entrance in the OECD also. And all this has to do with the fighting the criminal organizations in the environment, and also using our technology, our science, our university and academia and the federal governments with the Congress working together and to prioritize so that we can show the world that here we have wealth that can be turned into social and environmental well-being for the rest of the world. So I do believe totally in this capacity of Brazil and of recognizing that the federal government under the presidency of President Lula, and President Lula has been saying this to the rest of the world with the environmental agenda, that he considers this environmental agenda such an important part of our policies. This is fundamental for our economy, for foreign investments, and for job generation in Brazil. Now, considering the agenda of the Federal Senate and the National Congress as a whole, there are some agendas that are very polemic and they're criticized by scientific community, the media, and the public opinion. I'd like to reaffirm that the Federal Senate all the time has been very responsible with everything connected to the environmental responsibility and sustainable development. Our development has to be modern, has to use technology, and endeavors that need all of the legal guarantees. So we have nothing against the environmental licenses that are agile, but it should be efficient. It cannot be an environmental licensing system that is fragile, that will harm not only the environment, but will harm our relationships outside the world, outside the country. And the legal regularization also, that is something so important, but it cannot be the reason for illegal distribution of lands, and we have to meet the demands of small producers and small farmers, because the fight for the land reform or regularization is the expression of these societies. And especially now the issue of pesticides, we have to be careful about it. The bill that is considering this, we're analyzing it, and it's being submitted to the congressional committees. And the pesticides bill here is something important. If we should improve these molecules and so that they can be more efficient in fighting pests, the pesticides that are used for this in helping our agribusiness, modern molecules, new products that are less harmful to the environment and to human life, obviously we want to pass it. But we cannot go to the other extreme, and because self-control is not really reliable to prison society. We have to analyze all of these bills, and we can consider them very carefully and to see what's useful and to allow compatibility between the economic development of Brazil and the respect to humans, to the environment. So I do believe in the capacity of conciliation and reaching a balance and establishing criteria that will reach a common denominator to all areas, such as the marco temporal, or the temporal framework, and time framework in English. And because it's being assessed and analyzed more in depth, all of the stakeholders are analyzing it. That's why I wanted to promote this. And now it's in the Congressional Committee of Agriculture, after that the Congressional Committee of Justice. And we are going to identify this adequate model. Everybody agrees on the demarcation or delimitation of the lands for the indigenous peoples and the former black slaves communities as well, and in areas that are already occupied, especially in Santa Catarina by settlers. So that's why we need to reach a common ground for that person, that part that was harmed should be compensated. And there is a vote that was given in the courts by Alexandre de Moraes, the Minister, the Justice Alexandre de Moraes, in the Supreme Court regarding this. And if on one side the federal Senate will try to be a contention wall in preventing setbacks in the environment, we also need to ask everyone to call for everyone to act towards the development. We cannot allow the environmental development to be conflicting with the economic development. We have to align them within this reason. That is the role of the Federal Senate. That's what we believe in, and that's what we're betting on, and we're trying to promote concerning the issue of the development in our country. But one thing is clear and simple. We don't have any more environment and space and room in Brazil and the world for economic development without social and environmental responsibility. That is not possible anymore. The environmental protection argument that was a very romantic one that was usually present in the left-leaning policies. Now the environmental protection, this argument is part of the capitalist argument and for development. And we have to take this into account. We have to understand this. For institutions, private companies, national and international organizations have to understand the role of the environment in the national life and as an element of the economic development of the country. And finalizing, I would like to talk about the importance of having in Brazil the balance between the branches of power and the institutions of the government. It's that what I truly believe in. And being the president in the past 2 years and the Senate, and I was reelected in the first 6 months, and I always wanted to, my main purpose was to bridge gaps and to build bridges with the heads of the branches of power. No branch of power can or should stand above the other ones. This should not happen. This is not good for democracy. And this balance between the branches of power, the relationship between the president and the president of the republic and the presidents of the Congress and the House and the Senate and the general attorney's office and the ministers of state, this relationship has to be a healthy one, a constructive one. And I have been saying that when each branch of power understands their own limitations of powers and to respect the other branches of power, we're going to have a machine that's going to work in a very effective manner. I have been searching this, and the search for protagonism, it's not a good one for Brazil. We have to deliver the results. And the protagonism, it should be of the Brazilian society, and we're just the tools to create good for the Brazilian society. This individuality and this should not be taken into account in this. No power should be above others. Our republic is founded and is very strong and it's based on citizenship, political pluralism, social values of work. And I do believe in Brazil and the participation of society and agencies within this construction and this framework is, on my part, a very welcome part. So the Federal Senate is a place that will always receive criticism and suggestions, and I believe that Brazil, after doing this homework, its own homework, will be an international powerhouse, especially in green and economy and energy transition. We have all the requirements for so. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to thank the participation of Mr. President of the Senate, Mr. Rodrigo Pacheco, closing the third edition of the Conference of Latin American Cities in Brasília, an organization of the Council of the Americas. I'd like to wish all of you who followed us online and face-to-face, I'd like to thank you for your participation and for your audience. It was a pleasure to count with you this morning. Now we will be closing this conference and wishing you an excellent afternoon and see you next time. Thank you.